With every new episode, we get more and more information about what the amazing digital circus really is and how everything works there, so I've put together all the craziest and most interesting theories, hidden details, and a bit of info about the show creators for you. Feel free to throw this on in the background while you're eating, working, studying, or even sleeping. Just a heads up, there won't be any particular order here. Also, I want to say that I finally finished working on the series of videos I talked about earlier, so starting tomorrow you'll be able to see them. First, we need to understand why Caine actually sent the characters on a journey into the depths of their fears. Trying to express their opinion, and in the process putting Caine down, led to the administrator deciding to clearly show that he knows absolutely everything, and any further resistance will result in him permanently locking every character inside their own fear. The first thing we see is a lightning strike, and there's a certain symbolism in that since it's basically Caine's way of bringing Pomni, who by the way started this whole rebellion, back to reality. Pomni was the first to cross the line, and Caine's algorithm marked her as the main instigator, making it clear that she went too far and it's time to return to the reality she's actually in. We're shown Gummy Goo, who became an important part not only of Pomni's life, but of the entire digital circus fandom. However, right away you can notice a certain uneasiness on Pomni's face, and then we understand why. Gummy Goo clearly doesn't look the way he used to, and this is a pretty obvious hint that literally every person Pomni once considered a friend ends up being much worse in her eyes than she originally imagined. Gummy Goo wasn't chosen randomly at all. If we remember episode 2, Pomni and Gummy Goo were able to become real friends there. Their friendship didn't end on a bad note between the two of them, like it did for example with Jax. That's exactly why in episode 4 after Gummy Goo returned, Pomni felt warmth and genuine joy, constantly trying to talk to him. Notice that even in the farewell scene, Pomni clearly wanted to tell him something. However, she changed her mind because she was simply afraid that if the scenario from episode 2 repeated itself, it would be unbearable for her to realize that she's losing her only friend at that moment for the second time. The thought of Gummy Goo stuck in her head, and that's exactly why Caine is playing on it. He turns probably the only character Pomni fully trusts into a monster who betrayed her, exposing her biggest fear and the main problem in her life. Also, I was really intrigued by why exactly 3 crazed crocodiles are trying to tear Pomni apart, while the 4th one just calmly walks up and watches. I think that among those 3, there are definitely Jax and Abel. Even though Pomni didn't consider Abel her close friend, she still trusted him and was even ready to go to a bar with him. But in the end, she got yet another betrayal and someone playing with her feelings. Maybe the 3rd crocodile is someone from her real life, and the 4th one could be Gummy Goo himself, since Pomni still believes in him and genuinely hopes that he would never betray her. After Pomni, we were shown Ragatha, and here the show creators revealed so much that you could make a whole separate video about it. Everyone is focusing specifically on Ragatha's mom, and of course that makes sense since she is the main source of the character's problems. But let's go step by step. Right away, we see Ragatha sitting with her head down and eyes lowered, and then we're shown the dinner table, her family members, and of course her mom. So far, her mom hasn't done anything yet, however Ragatha already feels extremely uncomfortable. And before we continue, let's remember what she said about her mom earlier. We understand that Ragatha's mom was so cruel toward her children that even just mentioning her immediately triggers anxiety and fear. But let's still go back to episode 8. We see that besides Ragatha, her mom had 6 more children, and every single one of them is traumatized. She didn't have favorites or anyone she could show compassion to. Every one of her kids was equally bad, and Ragatha was no exception. We know that Ragatha is 30 years old, and I have a theory that in the past her mom was more lenient and her tyranny kept getting worse and worse every year. It's very possible that Ragatha was the oldest child and therefore spent the least time at home and ended up being the last one her mom's control fully reached. That's why we see that all her family members were already completely traumatized while Ragatha was still kinda holding on. Of course, she was already terrified of her mother and the criticism, yelling and insults coming from her, and that's exactly why she tried to please her in everything. However, it didn't lead to any results. A bunch of knives start flying into Ragatha's body, and if you pay attention, she managed to stop the first knife while all the others hit her directly. All these knives can be interpreted as extremely traumatic events happening between Ragatha and her mom. However, what really caught my attention was the knife that hit Ragatha in the eye. Back in the pilot episode, absolutely everyone noticed that Ragatha is the only character who is missing one eye. Everyone accepted it as a fact and just stopped paying attention to this detail. However, after all this time, the show creators put a really strong emphasis on it. It's very possible that this knife isn't just another form of psychological pressure from her mom, but an actual reflection of something that happened to Ragatha in real life. During one of their arguments, it could have escalated into a fight where Ragatha actually lost her eye. Notice that after everything that happened between them, at some point Ragatha just stopped resisting or reacting at all. She just sits there and with genuine fear watches her mother's behavior. Now let's talk about Jax, because there are also a few details here that almost no one paid attention to. At the very beginning, we're shown how Jax is trying to hide from people's mockery. At first, only people were shown, and only then, Ribbit, Kaufmo, and Pomni. Honestly, Jax is one of the hardest characters to analyze because his personality and his fears are based on multiple aspects of his life at once. In episode 7, we were shown one shocking truth about Jax. In the real world, he was responsible for an accident where someone might have died. We already discussed that this became one of the main reasons why Jax never wanted to return to the real world, and that this is exactly what became the foundation for all his panic attacks, and as a result, a life in constant fear. Despite that, Jax always tries to act like a cool guy who can't be hurt in any way, but his true nature is completely different. Jax is an extremely closed-off and insecure character who constantly tries to suppress it. He hides behind constant insults, jokes, and bullying, but from time to time, his true self still comes out. His biggest fear is taking off the shell he feels comfortable in, and this is where things get really interesting. Now, we understand that Jax has always been like this, and not just after Ribbit's abstraction like people assumed before, and the laughter of a bunch of people at the beginning of the scene points to that. Jax chose to put on the cool guy mask back in the real world to get rid of the constant mockery and bullying from other people. It probably helped him, however, every new abstraction of a character who was close to him slowly breaks this shell more and more, revealing the real Jax. We see how Ribbit and Kaufmo affected this, and now Jax is afraid that something similar will happen to Pomni, and that will completely destroy him, which is exactly what we see in this scene. The main problem in her life was shown to us back in episode 3. Zubil could never accept herself the way she is, and that directly reflected on her in the digital circus. However, the scale of this problem being this huge was honestly a shock for me. It seemed to me that Zubil managed to accept herself, and episode 7 kinda confirmed that, but deep down, she's still the same character whose problem keeps pulling her deeper and deeper. We see how Zubil is trying to break out of this, but things have already gone so far that she just can't suddenly accept herself, and deep inside she still hates her body. With Gangle, it's even simpler. We've known about her bipolar disorder for a long time already. Her masks are basically a reflection of her internal state, and considering how fragile the comedy mask is, we understand that destroying Gangle's mental health is pretty easy. In this scene, we see a bunch of masks around her that over time start to look really disturbing, and at the moment when it all reaches its peak, we see the same truck that was in episode 4. Maybe the truck is a reference to some event in real life. However, what if that's not exactly the case? Notice that in episode 4, the truck appeared at the moment when Gangle was at her peak happiness, while here it's the opposite. Gangle is completely depressed and broken. We've seen her sad before, but this is something different. What if the truck symbolizes the fact that Gangle can no longer stay in one specific state? What if her mental health is already so destroyed that she's literally dependent on constant mood swings and nothing can fix it? I think it's obvious to many that the scene with Queenie wasn't shown for no reason, and basically this is Kinger's biggest fear. In the scene with Ragatha, we see that even though Kinger is deeply devastated because of losing his wife, he still looks completely sane. He's clearly been carrying this pain with him throughout his entire life in the digital circus, and it seems to me that he deliberately pushed himself into the state we're used to seeing him in just so he wouldn't have to feel all that pain anymore. Considering how close Kinger and Ragatha are, even though this hasn't been directly confirmed, it still feels to me that right now, losing Ragatha would cause Kinger the greatest suffering. As we all know, the main theme that all the events of episode 7 revolved around was the escape plan that Abel presented to the others, and if you look closely, then absolutely all the characters, even our madman Kinger, were genuinely fired up about the idea of leaving this digital prison. They were so determined that they blindly trusted Abel without any serious proof and were ready to follow him no matter what. All of this shows just how badly they want to leave the digital circus. However, if we look at Jax, then he was the only one who asked questions, and overall wasn't set on escaping. This idea was noticeable right from the very start of episode 7, when Pomni, Ragatha, and Abel came to Jax for the keys.
I guess I'll check. These are all the keys I have where I don't know what they go to.
Wait, don't you want to come with us? This could be our one chance to finally leave all this behind.
Sure, why not?
On top of that, like I already said, all the other characters didn't ask Abel any questions at all and were confident that he was a real C&A employee stuck inside a mannequin body. Only Jax constantly pointed out the fact that nobody actually knows who Abel really is and kept questioning this whole idea. We will definitely come back to this. It's just going to be a bit later. But for now, we need to remember one more scene that proves that Jax would be happy to stay inside the digital circus tent and never return to the real world.
What's the rush? You got someone waiting for you outside?
Don't you?
Yeah.
Zubil made it clear directly that all of them want to get out, because in the real world there are people waiting for them. Jax agreed with that, but in his words, you can feel a certain fear. It's like he agreed on purpose so nobody would start arguing with him again, so to speak. On top of all that, pay attention to how unwillingly Jax took the administrator pass, as well as a couple scenes where our characters were already one step away from a potential escape. Everyone was united. I'd say they all felt like one big family, and only Jax distanced himself from them. You can see how bad the idea of escaping feels for him, and while everyone walks together and talks about what they will do in the real world, Jax follows them silently and with fear in his eyes. He is genuinely scared of the thought that he will return to the real world, and next it will become clear why. During the final step toward freedom, Pomni experienced some kind of glitch and just froze from the fear that all of this was an illusion. However, that doesn't change the fact that she genuinely wanted to get out just like everyone else. At any other moment, Jax would have pushed Pomni aside and confidently gone to press the so-called right button, but this time pay attention to how scared and uncomfortable he is just from the thought that the digital circus is about to disappear from his life. And what happened after that, we all remember very well. We weren't shown another Jax panic attack for no reason as the peak of his fear and anxiety. Something like this already happened in the previous episode, however back then we were limited to just a panic attack, while in episode 7 it was mixed with several shots from Jax's real life. A quiet and peaceful neighborhood. Just as a random fact, most likely this place is located in the state of Missouri that gets mixed with strange shots of a road, signs pointing to speed limits, and the possible presence of people on the road. All of this leads us to the thought that in the real world, Jax was responsible for a car accident, as a result of which a person died. This, by the way, explains the scene from episode 4, where Jax thought for a long time before getting into the car, or the scene from episode 2, when instead of driving the truck himself, Jax decided to make Gangle the driver. Putting all of this together, we understand that Jax has a panic-level fear of driving because of his actions in the real world. Considering that these exact memories appeared in his head at the moment of his greatest fear, it's very likely that this topic is his main psychological trauma, which is why Jax can't live calmly not only in the real world, but in the digital circus. Now let's go back to the scene where Jax agreed that in the real world, someone is waiting for him. While the others are waited for by family, friends, and co-workers, Jax has a completely different situation. He is waited for by the victim's relatives, the police, and a ton of memories of this event. I can easily imagine that during the investigation, Jax found out that there is a company called C&A, which can make it so a person is never found, and voluntarily decided to take part in the so-called experiment called the Amazing Digital Circus. Of course, you might argue that during the conversation with Abel, Jax stuck to the position that unlike Abel's story, none of them were C&A employees, and that they ended up in the digital circus by accident. But how much can you really trust this character right now? Remember how I said that Jax was the only one who asked questions and wasn't fully sure that the escape plan was real? All of this wasn't because Jax was worried that they might be getting lied to, but because he wanted to plant that seed of distrust in the heads of the other characters. All of this was so that they would also start doubting that the escape was real and wouldn't even try to make an attempt to carry out this plan. Jax genuinely wanted to stop everyone right from the start, and all of this was only because he is truly afraid of returning to the real world and diving back into that atmosphere of fear and anxiety. He genuinely wanted the others to change their minds and give up even the chance of a possible escape and just stay inside the digital circus. That's exactly why at the most critical moment Jax couldn't control himself, and his inner fear of ending up in the real world simply took over the rabbit's mind. As a result, Jax, without thinking about the other characters and their feelings and desires, single-handedly stripped everyone of even the smallest hope of returning to the real world. I'm more than sure that in any other situation Jax wouldn't have done this, but in that exact critical moment, Jax fully revealed his true personality, a coward and a weakling. By the way, that's exactly why he invented a new life for himself when he ended up in the digital circus, and he was genuinely convinced that this kind of way of thinking was the right one. If before we could only build theories and speculate that this kind of mindset is completely wrong, then now we understand the true reason behind Jax's behavior. He simply decided to create a new identity for himself to forget all the horror that was haunting him in the real world. All of this bullying by Jax.
It looks like I've taken Ragatha and dropped her in the deep fryer.
All of this was aimed at just one thing, completely wiping traumatic memories out of his head. This way we understand that all of Jax's problems didn't start in the digital circus, but long before this place ever appeared in Jax's life. This is what makes him very different from the others, since the other characters also had their own problems in the real world, but they were nothing compared to life in the digital circus, and that's exactly why they wanted to get out. While for Jax, the real world is way worse than anything that happened and is still happening to him in the digital circus. By the way, it's exactly because of the tragic incident in the real world that Jax reacts the strongest to the abstraction of other characters, and especially those who were close to him. We've already discussed the idea that it was Jax who became the reason behind Ribbit's abstraction. Did you notice that Ribbit and Kaufmo were equally close to Jax? However, almost all the mentions we've seen in the digital circus point specifically to Ribbit. This can really be connected to the fact that Jax isn't guilty in Kaufmo's abstraction, so he doesn't suffer from it as much. While when it comes to Ribbit's abstraction, Jax kinda had a hand in it. It's very possible that he feels guilt equal in strength to what he felt after the incident in the real world. That's exactly why Jax is so affected by the loss of Ribbit, and why she is his main trigger and the main focus of his visions. It all starts with Caine making all the characters gather into one pile with a single finger snap, and even if at first everyone was terrified, after that you can notice one interesting detail. While all the characters are so to speak surprised, Jax shows the highest level of distrust and contempt as if he already understands that there's nothing left to do but accept it. Then there's a small reference to the atmosphere of episode 3, and of course a clear reference to I have no mouth and I must scream. However, besides the reference, this scene shows us that Caine is already tired of the constant dissatisfaction from his subjects, and then once again demonstrates his superiority by placing the characters inside playing cards. There are literally only about 15 seconds between these scenes, but notice how much Jax has changed. From the classic I don't care to genuine fear from realizing that things are actually about to get worse. Most likely at first, even though Jax understood that this was only the beginning, he clearly couldn't imagine just how far Caine's mind goes when it comes to this kind of fun. Maybe he thought Caine would just toss them around a bit, maybe spin them, but after being placed inside the playing cards, it became obvious that this wouldn't end well. Then Caine plays on the most basic instinct, the instinct of self-preservation. The characters know perfectly well that inside the digital circus, it's impossible to die from physical causes, no matter what it is, from being in boiling oil to getting shot. However, even understanding that, they're still afraid of even the thought of hitting the ground, because their human feelings and instincts are still fully intact. At the last second before a potential death, Caine makes them freeze in mid-air and then lifts them back up again, throwing them back into a sense of danger and complete lack of control. The characters' brains instinctively understand that this cycle could repeat, which means even before anything actually happens to them, they already feel a primal fear of the inevitable. However, Caine breaks this pattern. The characters don't feel pain in the classic sense, and we were fully convinced of that back in episode 2, so a hit like that doesn't cause them serious damage. However, the sudden change of actions makes the brain basically scream for help, since the situation is completely out of control and it's impossible to predict what will happen next. The human brain is wired in a way where it always tries to reduce uncertainty, predict the future, and build a structured model of reality, and that's exactly what Caine is breaking. The characters fall down the stairs, and the most interesting part here is the pose we see Ragatha in. After that, they get eaten by Bubble, and here I noticed a few interesting details. First of all, take a closer look at the characters. They're already completely exhausted and drained. It's like they don't even care anymore about what's going to happen next, and they just want it to end as soon as possible. Bubble popping, and as a result, the disappearance of the characters is another one of Caine's ways of showing his superiority over everyone else. Here, the characters don't feel pain or fear, but once again they're reminded that compared to Caine, they are nothing. They're literally just tiny ants that can be controlled however he wants, and they can't do anything about it. After that, Caine takes it to the extreme. He bites Ragatha apart, blows up Kinger, puts Jax in an electric chair, creates an illusion of an exit for Zubil, turns Gangle into a balloon dog, and then pops her, grows to an enormous size, and crushes Pomni. And before we move on to the so-called theatrical dance number, let's talk in more detail about why Caine chose these specific punishments. Ragatha, Kinger, and Gangle don't really have a clear explanation, and instead of forcing it, let's skip them while with Jax, Zubil, and Pomni, the situation is way more interesting. First, we're shown Jax in an electric chair, and I can't not mention how similar this is to the scene from episode 4. We've already talked many times about how Jax isn't actually the cool guy he tries to appear as. His mind is his weak point. Constant attempts to forget the past that keeps coming back drive him insane. We also remember that Jax was one of the few who actually played by the rules of the digital circus and tried to find fun in absolutely everything. I'm sure Caine understands this perfectly, and with this punishment, he's basically hinting to Jax that the rabbit needs a reset, a rollback to his old settings where there were no thoughts about escaping and there was only a fun life in the digital circus. In episode 7, we remember that it was Zubil who spoke the loudest about how it's time to press the blue button and get out of this place. However, that's not the only reason why Caine prepared this specifically for Zubil. Throughout all the episodes, Zubil constantly showed her disrespect toward Caine and her disregard for all his adventures, directly making it clear how much she hates being in the circus. This way, we understand that here, Caine acts like a real psychologist playing on Zubil's biggest desire, giving her another false hope, and then completely destroying her world in the end. Jax directly blames Pomni and Zubil for everything bad that has happened in the digital circus recently, and basically he's right. Before Pomni showed up and her attempts to find that exit, everything was fine, and there were no signs that anything like this could ever happen. It's with Pomni that chaos, and so to speak, a rebellion of the characters began in the digital circus. In his punishment, Caine shows that Pomni went too far and took on too much, trying to put herself against him. However, she didn't take into account that in Caine's eyes, no one can compare to him. After that, the final act begins, that same theatrical show. And here Caine basically makes it clear that all the characters are completely under his control. They can't resist or speak up. They only do what Caine tells them to do. Notice how he gradually increases the intensity of the movements. And even though the characters don't feel muscle pain, they can still feel exhaustion on a mental level. Then Caine once again plays on Pomni's fear by throwing her into the worst possible outcomes of the adventures from episodes 2, 3, and 4, and in the end, another demonstration of Caine's power. He stretches, slams, explodes, runs over the characters, and all of it ends with the characters returning to the same position they started this so-called adventure in. However, now we can see how much their mental and physical state has changed. The final point was the explosion, where Caine finally showed that he is the god here, and absolutely no one can compare to him and his abilities.
I think we all understand each other now.
After that, several days of Caine's adventures begin that they simply couldn't refuse, and judging by everything, these adventures became way worse than anything we saw in previous episodes. If before some adventures only drained the residents of the digital circus, now they've become completely insane, and the biggest problem is that they couldn't be anything else anymore. I'm sure Caine wasn't intentionally creating such complex and awful adventures, but we'll talk about that a bit later. We were shown that Kinger ended up in a shredder, but of course the most interesting part is Pomni. All the characters were in the cafe, then Pomni disappeared and appeared again. I think everyone has already talked about the fact that back in January 2023, Gooseworx posted the digital circus announcement where it was shown what happened between these scenes. I just want to point out how well everything was done. In this scene, Pomni tries to take a bite of the sandwich she started eating in the cafe, and her return happens in the exact same pose as in the announcement. Now that we've gone through all the so-to-speak punishments, let's finally talk about the real reasons behind Caine's behavior. Looking at the digital circus code, we find out that all torment is supposed to be random. However, here at first glance, we see something completely different. And to understand what's really going on, let's go back to the beginning of the episode. We saw the state Caine was in. He had absolutely no control over himself, and eventually the system got so overloaded that he temporarily shut down. After rebooting, we see some glitches and already understand that something is wrong with Caine. The situation fully got worse when Caine returned to the characters. He wanted to do everything as usual, but another wave of negativity pushed him over the edge. The code that was at the core of Caine broke, and this led to a hyperbolized display of his power. Caine really did want to put the characters in their place and show who's in charge, but if everything was normal with him, he would have just tossed them around a couple times or something like that, but definitely wouldn't have done anything like this. This wasn't revenge, just a way to restore his authority. The further torment became the norm for Caine, and he genuinely saw it as fun. His main goal was for the characters to take part in the adventures and stay cheerful. Technically, they are participating in the adventures and everything else doesn't matter. Although maybe what we actually saw was the true version of Caine, the way he was always meant to be, and the way AI is portrayed in I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. We know that the events of the digital circus take place in 2017, and we also know the age of each character. Kinger was born in 1969, and from what we can tell, he was a pretty gifted kid from a very young age. Basically, you could call this year a key moment for the entire digital circus story, because if Kinger was never born, who knows how things would have gone for C and A. Right now, there's no exact date for when this company was founded. However, considering that developing this kind of tech, especially back then, would have taken at least 10 years, I can only assume that C&A showed up somewhere around 1980. Using the same logic we used to figure out Kinger's birth year, let's talk about the rest. Ragatha was born in 1987, Gangle in 1991, Pomni in 1992. Jax and Zubil are the youngest characters in the digital circus, and they were both born in the same year, 1995. For about 15 years, C&A were trying to create the perfect creative AI, and in 1996, they finally pulled it off. Caine was created, and his name is basically an abbreviation. The full name Caine, Creative Artificial Intelligence Networking Entity. Originally, C&A were developing two AI agents, the red one, Caine, and the blue one. We can see him under the name Experimental. The blue AI was more stable and easier to train than Caine. The problem is that they existed in the same system. As his instability kept increasing, Caine managed to break the barrier and absorb the blue AI, basically taking its traits for himself. So Caine became the only AI agent who, after absorbing the second agent, managed to become almost perfect. He's a mix of the stream of creativity that came from his earlier version and the high level of stability of the blue AI. And it's exactly because of that stability that Caine was able to control all the processes in the digital circus for 21 years. Besides Caine in 1996, the system also got Paraphernalia Engine, Wacky Watch, and Bubble Chef added. All of that was needed for Caine to build out all the rooms and locations of the digital circus, to create worlds and chaos inside them, and also to create his personal assistant. The full creation of the digital circus took Caine 2 years, and in 1998 everything was finished and ready for the first batch of transferred consciousnesses. In 1999, the consciousnesses of 7 people were transferred into the digital circus: Scratch, Quenny, Kinger, Wormo, Bizco, Ratty, and Spike. Some of them were former C&A employees. We know for sure that Scratch, Kinger, and Wormo worked at C&A before ending up in the digital circus. I have a theory that Queenie might have also worked there alongside her husband. However, for now, that's just a theory. Bizco, Ratty, and Spike were regular people who basically ended up in the digital circus by accident. It's very likely that under the pretense of testing a new technology, virtual reality, they were offered to put on a headset and, well, you already know what happened next. In episode 7, it was revealed that Scratch was the first character who turned into an abstracted monster. We got more info on this character in episode 8. We understand that he was terminally ill, and because of that, we can assume that Scratch might have been aware of, and maybe even supported the idea that C&A were planning to transfer people's consciousness into a digital reality, basically giving them digital immortality. However, if we remember the story of Abel, which is basically Scratch's memories, this theory falls apart right away because no one really understood what goal the heads of C&A were trying to achieve. At the beginning of episode 8, we see Scratch trying to figure something out from a still unfinished Caine, which once again shows that none of the employees or regular people knew about the true goals of C&A. Because of all this, Scratch's mental state kept getting worse month by month, and in 2000, he abstracted. Right away, I'll say that there's no exact info about the order of abstractions and the arrival of new characters. I'll be basing this on official info that indirectly touches on this topic, logic, and my own assumptions. During this period, no new characters appeared in the digital circus, while all the others were gradually turning into abstracted monsters. Wormo in 2001, Spike in 2002, Ratty in 2003, and Bizco in 2004. For 3 years, Kinger and Queenie were the only residents of the digital circus. We know how important they were to each other because even 10 years later, Kinger still talks about the time he spent with his wife like it was yesterday. In 2007, Queenie turned into that terrifying creature, and it was a massive hit for Kinger, who at that moment was left completely alone in the digital circus with no idea of what would happen next. Despite that, Kinger still stayed a pretty sane character, and after a long period of wandering alone, this happened. In 2008, a new face appeared in the digital circus, Ragatha, and this moment became a turning point for the entire digital circus. Kinger finally stopped being the only resident of the circus. Caine realized that new characters could appear. C&A started gaining momentum with the consciousness transfer program. Ragatha was basically the first successful experiment after the success of the original cast. For me, there's still an open question why C&A took a 9-year break. It's very likely that during this time, they were trying to make this technology as safe as possible, fix all the system issues, and also bring Caine as close to a perfect state as possible. During this period, several casts changed in the digital circus, and since there are some we know almost nothing about, I'm not going to guess what happened to those unknown characters, and we'll just agree that they ended up in the digital circus and then abstracted during this time frame. An important event of 2010 was the arrival of Ribbit. There's a theory that Ribbit was one of the C&A employees since her name appears on the list of those who once worked at the company. We can also spot Kaufmo there. His consciousness was transferred into the digital circus in 2013. We'll talk about these characters in a bit more detail a little later, but for now, let's go over the arrival dates of the characters we all know well. In 2014, Jax ends up in the circus. It's important to note that at first his behavior was completely different from what we've seen in all the episodes of the amazing digital circus. He didn't mess with others, wasn't rude or distant. Jax was a shy guy who was simply scared of realizing the new reality he'd have to live in. Almost right away, Ribbit managed to kind of find the key to Jax, which eventually led to a real friendship between these characters, and later Kaufmo joined them too. In 2015, Gangle appeared, and in the next year, something happened that completely changed the usual life in the digital circus. The abstraction of Ribbit in 2016 became the moment after which Jax put on his mask. His true feelings were hidden behind the image of a cool guy who doesn't really care about everything happening around him. As a result, Jax started acting out and making things worse for everyone else. In that same year, Zubil appeared in the digital circus, basically replacing Ribbit. I have a theory that this is exactly why there's kind of this tension between Jax and Zubil. While Jax, in his usual way, tries to joke around, Zubil responds in a very cold and harsh way. This behavior pattern is only seen between these two. In 2017, the latest abstraction so far happened, and the victim was Kaufmo. After that, the events begin that we've been seeing starting from the pilot episode. After this character appeared, the usual life in the digital circus gradually started to fall apart, and let's quickly go over how it all went down. It's important to note that from the moment Pomni appeared to Caine's disappearance, about a month passed since some episodes were direct continuations of each other. Pomni first sees a door with the sign exit, and full of excitement tries to find it to escape the digital circus, but in the end Pomni just ends up in the void and Caine saves her. Then Pomni takes part in her first full adventure and everything seems fine. She even manages to find a real friend, even if it was an NPC. However, Caine interferes again and deletes Gummy Goo. In episode 3, we see how Pomni is slowly trying to get used to her new life, while Ragatha is doing everything she can to get her attention. Caine glitches for the first time, and we see just how much the digital circus depends on this AI agent. During the adventure in Mildenhall Manor, Pomni loses control because she doesn't understand how to get out, and from the thought that she's stuck forever in a place she doesn't want to be. We learn details about Kinger's past life, and after this heartfelt conversation, Pomni gets much better and everything is heading towards Pomni and Ragatha actually becoming real friends. In episode 4, the characters refuse Caine for the first time and take part in an adventure out of the box. Here it's important to understand that Pomni has now fully adapted to the digital circus, and Jax has gradually started to show himself as a good character. Then, we were shown how the characters kept pushing their own ideas onto Caine more and more. We got a bit more of Jax's past and saw him from a better side. At the same time, we got pulled deeper into Ragatha's lore, learning about her traumatic past and clearly seeing what it's leading to right now. Episode 6 was one of the most tragic ones because it really felt like we were about to see the real Jax who can actually be a friend, but you already remember how that ended. Kinger was once again shown as an amazing psychologist. We got hints about the importance of C&A, and they kinda locked in the friendship between Gangle and Zubil. In episode 7, the characters started getting even closer. Jax's past was revealed even more. It felt like they were just about to escape, however, all of that turned out to be another fun adventure from Caine, which was, to put it mildly, not received very well. This moment became a turning point cause after it we were shown just how cruel Caine can be. We learned a lot more about C&A, and after all of that, something terrible happened. Caine was accidentally deleted, which led to irreversible consequences in the form of a half-destroyed digital circus and a feeling of total hopelessness. At the end of the video, I'd like to very briefly talk about what might happen next. I already made a full video on this topic where I explained everything in detail, so if you're interested, you can check out my theory. For now, I'll just say that most likely all the characters are stuck in the digital circus forever. Maybe someone will abstract, but I don't really believe in that. They'll probably just keep existing for a long time until the digital circus system breaks down, and that could happen in 2057. The show creators revealed the true guts of the digital circus system, where a ton of secrets are hidden, from Ragatha and Bubble all the way to what actually happened to Caine and how he disappeared from the digital circus. we can see the system name, King Solution 2.0. Of course, the first thing that stands out is that this is version 2, which means before the digital circus we're used to, there was another one, most likely a failed version, or just a prototype. Also looking at the name, we see King Solution, and I think it's pretty obvious that this is a direct reference to Kinger, who himself confirmed that he's the developer who created the foundation of the code. Next, we see Digital Circus mainframe, and to put it simply, the Digital Circus runs on a dedicated server, and right now Kinger is inside its core. Basically, Kinger went deep into the code where he can do pretty much anything. We also see a line that shows the network name of the device or server it's connected to, meaning the Digital Circus isn't just a world, it's a server environment. Then things get even more interesting. We see the login, Kinger, but looking at the password is actually kinda sad. Queenie123, that's the password Kinger set, and at this point we can understand that Kinger and Queenie are basically aliases of real people who later ended up in the circus with those same names. Taking all of this into account, and the way Kinger treated Queenie even after her abstraction, you can safely say they had an insanely loving and close family, and that's what makes breaking down this line of code actually pretty sad. Then they showed us the server folder structure, Caine, experimental, consciousness research, and brain scans. Next to Caine, we see the word agent. In AI development, the term agent has a very specific meaning. It's not just a script that runs a predefined algorithm. An agent is an autonomous entity that learns from its environment and makes its own decisions to achieve a goal. If you remember what Kinger said during his monologue, it lines up perfectly.
I see. He's a highly advanced AI, and this is his world. One that he created from nothing. So naturally, he has control over everything.
A bit lower, we see a similar line, but instead of Caine, it says experimental, and that's nothing less than proof that besides Caine, there were other AI agents that were supposed to fulfill the same role, but they were never meant to come into existence, and Kinger also told us about that.
Specifically creative AI. The kind that could come up with its own ideas and create things within the program.
What is going on right now?
Caine was our first semi-successful attempt at that. I can't remember what we originally called him, but he was one of my greatest achievements as a programmer.
Because Caine is the first successful agent, all the previous attempts were basically left alone, so to speak, and no new ones were developed, which made Caine the only successful AI of the C&A company. Then we can notice consciousness research and brain scans, and this is basically direct confirmation of what Abel said in episode 7. These two lines are essentially direct documented proof in the code of how people end up in the digital circus. They're not just teleported, their consciousness is copied or transferred using brain scanning technology. It's very likely that this technology works autonomously, because if we take Pomni for example, she ended up there after C&A had already shut down, and based on what we know, all she had to do was put on the headset, and that's it. She was already in the digital circus. We also see the line caine-core.lisp, and next to it the date, October 15th, 1996. That's the day Caine's core was created. On that same date, Bubble Chef, Paraphernalia Engine, and Wacky Watch appeared in the digital circus. I think everyone understands Bubble. This line of code is responsible for generating objects inside the digital circus, and Wacky Watch raises questions. For us, it's a well-known website where leaks from the show creators sometimes appear, but within the context of the digital circus, this line of code might be responsible for creating randomness in the world. Honestly, I don't really have any other guesses what it could be. Besides that, they also revealed the dates when Scratch and Ragatha appeared. Scratch ended up in the digital circus on October 15th, 1999, and Ragatha on October 15th, 2008. You gotta admit, it's a weird coincidence that literally everything happens on October 15th. It's very likely that every new character appears on that exact date. We all remember that Kinger only wanted to temporarily disable Caine. Here we see the line stop Caine process. This is an important moment, because the stop command is not a system deletion, it's more like an emergency brake. But in response, Caine answers in a very mocking way. After that, Kinger moves on to more aggressive measures, but gets hit with an actual Linux system error. It means that Kinger is not allowed to hack or view the memory of processes that are running under super user privileges. Then they show us that Caine is actually very well protected, and most likely that's exactly why he has this obsession with the number 57. After that, we see how the system keeps rejecting Kinger's requests, which makes it clear that even Kinger's access level isn't enough to perform actions like this. To be more specific, Kinger was trying to put Caine into what you could call a digital coma. Pay attention to this line. In Linux, this command is used to change file permissions. The numbers 000 mean a complete removal of all permissions. No read, no write, no execute for absolutely any user. There's also this line that really caught my attention. Unfinished work detected. Basically, the whole phrase is a way for Caine to block Kinger, but what exact unfinished work Caine is referring to is still a big mystery that I think we'll find out about in episode 9. At this point, Kinger realizes that getting directly to Caine is probably not going to happen, and because of that, we see this line of code. It means Kinger is trying to delete Paraphernalia Engine, the same file that generates all objects, textures, and obstacles in the digital circus. After failing there too, we see one insanely interesting phrase that can be interpreted in several different ways. Cannot inject torment. Torment must be 100% accidental. On one hand, this could be a core rule of the digital circus when it comes to the characters. The AI is programmed in a way where it can't intentionally cause pain or suffering to the circus residents. That's why all the disturbing things that happen to them under Caine's control are interpreted by the algorithm as fun accidents. But this line can also be understood as a response to the attempt to delete Paraphernalia Engine. If you remove the digital circus textures, theoretically the characters inside could be harmed, and because of that, the system blocks this request as a potential threat. Hundreds of all-seeing eyes are watching. Caine completely stopped pretending to be a system error and started talking to Kinger directly. The line itself is a reference to a scene from the pilot episode. Kinger sees that the system lock has reached 20% and, in panic, uses a completely real basic Linux command to stop services. In response, Caine says, "On what grounds are your authority?" once again showing his superiority over Kinger. But here you can notice one detail cause in that question it would be correct to use is, but Caine uses are, and that basically shows that at this moment Caine is very unstable, because it's unlikely that such an advanced AI would make such a basic mistake. Then the real drama begins, because Kinger uses this command. To put it simply, he launches his own script, Green Grounds. Daemon means it runs in the background to bypass Caine's antiviruses, but the most important part is the goal. Kinger is trying to break that same core ethical protocol we already talked about. He wants to disable that safety so he can force his way through the AI's protection. I think it makes sense to speed things up a bit. Caine keeps mocking Kinger, but here we can notice something weird. In this line, Caine directly addresses Kinger and almost reveals his real name. Maybe Kinger's real name is Grant, but that's just a theory. Kinger launches a hidden system cleanup, but the system asks for an admin code. He enters the most basic password admin1234, which is obviously wrong, and Caine mocks him once again. Then Caine keeps playing his insane game with the code. Kinger in desperation types paraphernalia, and Caine responds with this. That is a wacky word, but wrong code. You can also notice a 35-second countdown. In the next shots, things get really interesting. First of all, Bubble suddenly shows up and bursts in with the line delete this motherfucker. But right now, the most important line is, are you want to delete Caine? In response, Kinger says, yes. Basically, Kinger intentionally killed Caine cause he had no other choice. Before we wrap this up, let's take a closer look at this line. The exclamation mark in a file name in programming often means an emergency, last resort script that breaks the system's normal logic. This is an attempt to roll the server state back exactly one step, a forced execution key. Kinger is basically telling the server to ignore any restrictions, errors, or blocks that were set by Caine. And this part is actually really interesting, because Wuji in Chinese philosophy means the original state of emptiness before the creation of the universe. So Kinger is literally launching a protocol to return the circus to a state of absolute nothingness. Before we start, I want to say that this scene reveals quite a lot of details, and we'll definitely come back to it a bit later. First, let's quickly go over the full timeline of this character. Ribbit most likely entered the digital circus back in 2010 and was one of many characters who eventually turned into abstracted monsters. We also know that this tragic event didn't happen that long ago, cause Goose revealed that Ribbit abstracted before Kaufmo. We also know for sure that Zubil replaced Ribbit. Pay attention to Zubil's behavior in the pilot episode and, for example, in episode 8. These are basically two completely different versions of the character when it comes to how she treats others. The clearest example is Gangle. Zubil isn't actually as rude as she might have seemed at first, and she just needed a bit more time to adjust to the digital circus, which once again proves that Zubil hasn't been there for that long, and that most likely means Ribbit abstracted not long before Pomni showed up. We need this to understand that Jax still hasn't fully come to terms with losing his best friend, and even though this was clearly shown in episode 7, I decided to expand on this theory a bit so it's easier to follow everything that's going to be said next. The first mention of Ribbit happened in episode 5 during stargazing. Already at this point, we understood just how important this character was for Jax. Keep in mind that Gooseworx directly confirmed that Jax is one of the main characters in the digital circus. At first, everyone thought this adventure was created by Kinger. It was calm, relaxed. Considering what Jax had come up with before, no one could have imagined that something like this could come from our favorite rabbit. However, after seeing the scene with Ribbit in the final episode trailer, now I'm sure this adventure was actually a tribute to Ribbit. And just as a bonus, pay attention to the sky during stargazing. You can clearly see the silhouette of a rabbit and a bow tie. That's exactly why we got to see such a calm and genuinely sincere Jax. We've only seen him like that a few times, and that's important to understand. All of his sincerity was directed exclusively toward Pomni, and I'm sure that was intentional, cause Jax saw something in Pomni that reminded him of Ribbit. In episode 6, the topic of Jax's close friends was explored a bit more. What matters here is remembering Jax's reaction to his friends' doors. While the crossed-out image of Kaufmo triggered something like anger in Jax, the image of Ribbit, on the other hand, put Jax into a kind of trance. Now we get to episode 7, where the topic of Ribbit was explored even further. First, we were shown Jax's hallucination. It's important to pay attention to two details. The first one is, of course, the stars. Absolutely everything that's connected to Ribbit in any way ends up being reflected through the stars, and this is going to be very important a bit later. The second detail is their photo together, where we can see Jax, Kaufmo, and Ribbit. You can also notice a mug of hot chocolate, which directly leads us to the next scene.
Hey, you alright?
I'm great.
Here we hear a few lines from Ribbit, and to this day there's still no clear transcription of what was actually said. However, the most likely version is this.
Hey.
Most likely there was some kind of serious conflict between Jax and Ribbit that became the breaking point in their relationship. I'm not saying Ribbit abstracted right after that, but it most likely happened not long after, especially considering how strongly Jax still reacts to that same mug. So far, there haven't been any hints from the show creators about what actually happened to Ribbit. However, if we put together the fact that Ribbit is a girl, that she and Pomni share some similarities, and also the fact that Jax chose Pomni during his most important adventure, it might suggest that to understand what happened between them, we need to look at the dynamic between Pomni and Jax. We already talked about this theory on the channel, so I'll keep it as brief as possible. The main thing to understand is Jax's worldview, which is based on character archetyping. The funny part is that in that same episode, they showed just how wrong Jax actually is. Even back then, it was obvious that Jax was wrong, and this is basically the key mistake that led to his biggest loss during his time in the digital circus. However, even though Jax claimed it was all just an illusion, because of the similarities between Pomni and Ribbit, he genuinely wanted to protect Pomni and keep her as safe as possible so that the same thing that happened to his closest friend wouldn't happen to her. At this point, we can assume that Jax tried to push the same kind of mindset onto Ribbit so they could survive in the digital circus for as long as possible. If we remember those random comments from Ashley Nichols about Ribbit, we can tell this is a character fans are gonna love. Most likely she was just like Pomni, cheerful, kind, and genuinely friendly, and all that archetype nonsense was only getting in the way of her living normally. That mismatch between reality and the lifestyle Jax forced onto her slowly destroyed Ribbit over time, and with each year it only got harder and harder for her. The moment she tried to be herself, Jax could turn aggressive toward her, and it's very possible that this happened during the snow adventure, and that's why Ribbit might have said, "You've become different. You think I don't care about us?" At first, Jax was kind to her, but the more so-called character he witnessed, the more pressure he started putting on Ribbit about sticking to her archetype in order to survive. All of this eventually led to Ribbit's abstraction, and Jax still can't forgive himself for it. Every time he tries to make new friends, it ends up with him putting on that same persona again, and that's where it starts getting really dangerous. Now that we've gone through all of that, let's finally talk about that scene from the trailer.
Have you ever done something that you regret?
Here, we're seeing a dialogue between Ribbit and Jax, and the events are taking place inside Ribbit's room. We know that each character's room is created automatically based on their appearance. Very simplified. Ribbit is green, the glow is green, everything here is pretty obvious. We can notice something like a lamp that the glow is coming from, and also just as a small detail, I noticed a kind of strange positioning of the stars in this area, which most likely is connected to the interior of Ribbit's room. It's important to understand that Jax himself doesn't really care about stars, but they were an extremely important and meaningful part of Ribbit's life, and that's exactly why Jax started to value them just as much as his friend did. Most likely, Ribbit was the first person who truly understood Jax, and this is just one of many genuine conversations between Jax and Ribbit. She was the only one Jax could actually be himself with. The star scene wasn't chosen randomly. It once again highlights that Jax really did try to build something similar with Pomni, but because of his own internal fears and his strong attachment to Ribbit, he couldn't let go of all that or replace his best friend with someone new. Right now, things in the digital circus couldn't be worse, and Jax clearly understands that nothing like that will ever happen again, and it's very possible that this scene might serve as some kind of farewell for Jax. The memories of how good things were with Ribbit, and the realization that it's never coming back, combined with the real fear of returning to the real world, even if that's even possible, will ultimately lead Jax to the same fate as his other close friend. So Ribbit really could end up being the reason why, at least for Jax, episode 9 will be the first episode with a truly tragic ending. All of this is just a crazy assumption, but right now you can expect pretty much anything from the finale of the digital circus. Right before Jax did what he did, we saw that the characters were given a choice: press the red button and stay in the digital circus, or press the blue button and finally escape this digital prison. And in the most tense moment, the character you'd expect this from the least actually did it. Yeah, at first it really looked like Jax just decided on his own to keep everyone in the digital circus because of some kind of fear and panic attacks. But today we're going to dive as deep as possible and dig up the real reason behind what Jax did. First, we got to go back to the beginning of the episode, to that scene with Jax's kind of depression. Once again, we were shown how important Ribbit and Kaufmo are for Jax, and that he's still hurting like crazy over everything that happened to them. However, right now it's important to understand that this isn't just sadness or memories. This is already a serious mental issue that makes the character insanely vulnerable. Tiny spoiler for later. Just remember what the characters said about the recent changes in Kaufmo's behavior. I'm not saying Jax is abstracting or anything like that. Just keep that info in your head. We're shown Jax's hallucinations for the first time. This isn't just scraps of memories or a panic attack anymore. This is a full-on shift in his consciousness. The scariest part is the moment where Jax sees Ribbit's hands, and what's even worse, they slowly reach toward Jax. We all remember where Ribbit is, right now, and hints like this from the show creators can't just be ignored. But the truth is, this goes way deeper than it looks at first glance. After the characters kind of saved Jax from that trap and sent him on an important mission, we saw how much Jax changed. It's like he started living again instead of just existing. These exact scenes are the key ones, because everything was leading to Jax finally being able to get back to a normal state, but Zubil's behavior once again dragged Jax back into tearing himself apart. Even if from the outside it looks like he's totally okay, inside that same spark that makes him the troublemaker we all love disappeared again. So it turns out Jax had a chance to come back, but if you can put it that way, it was taken from him. We can clearly see this in the next scenes where Jax no longer looks satisfied or happy. Remember how before in every adventure he was the first to rush in to see what was going to happen, always looking for something interesting, while now to be in a similar state, all he really needs is to feel useful. Jax just has to feel like he matters to someone, and when that's not there, we see him as a completely empty, drained, like a lemon kind of character. The final point in destroying Jax's mental state in episode 7 was the scene in Caine's office. After that, we were shown yet another confirmation of this. Now we fully understand what Jax is feeling right before making just one action that became the reason for this whole video. Jax chooses the red button, and it looks like he takes away everyone else's last chance to escape. However, I already said that all of this is just another one of Caine's exciting adventures, but what happens next reveals a lot and completely explains why Jax chose the red button. At this point, it might seem like Jax is just completely losing his mind and turning into a total psycho, but just listen carefully to everything that's said next.
You dirty liar! You scumbag! You made me... You got in my head! You just lie about everything, don't you?
Huh?
You can mess with our minds too, can't you? The stupid sauce, the vegan thing, God knows what else!
Our names?
No, hold on, guys. Wait. I may have the ability to add temporary modifiers to make adventures more interesting, but that's it. If I did anything more, trust me, it would not end well.
Scratch. The first abstraction.
Hey! I didn't say anything like that!
At this moment, we finally come to some kind of conclusion. The characters fully understand that Caine can actually affect their minds. Of course, Jax had questioned this before, however now it became obvious to everyone. Considering how badly Caine started to glitch and literally shake from fear that he was, so to speak, exposed, we can understand that they're all right. Kinger's words about the first character who turned into an abstracted monster were extremely important. We don't know which of all those characters is actually Scratch. However, the fact that he's mentioned makes it clear that Caine is somehow involved in all of this. Now we can go back to the beginning of the episode where we were clearly shown how Jax was losing control over himself and sinking into creepy and insanely chaotic hallucinations. At this point, we clearly understand that all of this was Caine's doing. Even if we dive a bit deeper into the scene where Jax hits another panic attack, we see how he starts seeing fragments of real life. If we look closely, they're not exactly horrifying, but they're definitely not as joyful as life in the digital circus. All of this pushes us to the idea that at that moment, the decision to press the red button wasn't made by Jax at all, but by the toothy administrator himself. Having access to everyone's mind, Caine can create absolutely any kind of chaos inside the character's consciousness that he wants. But the scariest part is that this is only the beginning. Caine set Jax up so that because of a fear he didn't even understand himself, he chose the red button, thereby proving how good they all have it living in the digital circus and how much they don't want to go back to the real world. By doing this, Caine literally validated himself. However, something tells me it caused a wave of negativity in absolutely every character, and episode 8 is going to be even crazier than what we just watched. Also, remember how I said that getting into Jax's head is only the beginning? Everything I talked about regarding Jax in the first half of the video actually points to the idea that Caine always knows who's going to be the next character to get abstracted, because the moment he senses someone's weakness, he immediately starts putting pressure on that character harder and harder, and that's exactly what's been happening to Jax throughout the last episodes. For the same reason Caine was able to so easily control Jax. This theory is so interesting, at least because there are a lot of contradictions, since some facts directly say that it was impossible from the very beginning, while others say that the whole plan was true from the start. Let's dive into the full timeline and look at this theory from every angle, and after that, you will see that our favorite characters actually did have a chance to escape, but one single action completely destroyed all chances of that. First off, it's important to understand who Abel is, because he is one of the key characters in this theory. Pay attention to the moment when Abel explains to the others that they need to be quieter, since Caine can be watching everything that's going on. The show creators put a clear emphasis on the paintings that show Caine's eyes. We will come back to this a bit later, but for now let's talk a little about Abel. After he shared his story of interacting with C and A, the focus shifted to the escape plan. At this point we have several contradictions. One of the main signs that all of this was a lie from the start is the drawn bee, the exact same one that Caine constantly draws. On one hand, this really points to Caine's involvement in all of this. But why did you decide that Caine drew the bee during the development of this plan? Why did nobody think that Caine could have first seen the real escape plan and only then added the bee to it? If you pay attention, then Caine is almost always drawing, and he could have done this by accident. If you think about it, then none of the characters pay attention to the fact that Caine always draws bees. We as fans of the digital circus and people who love noticing tiny details know this, but it's very unlikely that the characters are just as aware of it. Considering that Caine is actually a pretty scatterbrained AI, then I can really imagine that he kinda automatically drew the bee after accidentally discovering the escape plan, and so that nobody would discover it. He made what seemed like the best decision, just crossing out the bee. I get that way too much time was spent on this detail, but it was insanely important to do this so you understand that things here aren't as one-sided as they seem at first. Now we move to the final scene of episode 7 and pay attention to Kinger's words.
Scratch. The first abstraction.
He mentioned someone named Scratch and said that this was the first abstraction. Here things get really interesting because after this character disappeared, we saw the hot dog pendant. Obviously, this pendant belonged to the character everyone nicknamed Dobby, and even the show creators confirmed his name. However, right now I'm sure that this was just a reference to the fan community, cause more than a year and a half ago, one of the 3D animators involved in the digital circus revealed that his actual name is Scratch, which means Abel is a kind of reincarnation of Scratch, who as we now know was one of the first developers of the digital circus. Knowing this, it's important for us to understand who this mannequin was throughout the entire episode. Was it Scratch the whole time? Or maybe this was already Abel created by Caine. However, there is a high chance that we saw two different characters inside one mannequin. What if at first this was Scratch, but then Caine replaced him with Abel? You might reasonably ask why then he originally introduced himself as Abel. To understand this, we need to remember a few scenes from episode 7. Obviously that between Kinger and Scratch, some kind of conflict happened a long time ago, and apparently it was strong enough that Kinger remembered it even while being in a lit room. I'm sure that Scratch perfectly understood that Kinger would at least be surprised by his return, and so, as not to destroy his plan from the start, a decision was made to temporarily not tell Kinger about everything that was planned. We also remember that Scratch, or Abel, that he was one of the first characters to end up in the digital circus, but he got stuck with a mannequin body. At the same time, we see that Scratch had a unique body. To understand how this happened, we need to briefly remember how abstraction works. In short, when turning into an abstracted monster, the character's code gets corrupted, which is what leads to the transformation into this creature. What if Scratch was also on the verge of abstraction? However, his code didn't work the way it was supposed to, and instead of turning into an abstracted monster, Scratch got stuck inside the mannequin body. Understanding this, and the benefit of such an outcome, is exactly why he started developing the escape plan. Now let's move to Caine's words in the final scene.
You mean this was all...
An adventure! Yes! And one I've been cooking up for a good long while!
Our administrator very confidently stated that this was his adventure that he had been developing for so long. In that case, I have one huge question. If all of this was originally planned by Caine, then why did Abel, let's call him that for convenience, watch all the characters for a very long time? There was no point in this. If Caine wanted to gather some kind of information this way, then why create a mannequin for that if he himself could easily and unnoticed do it? Maybe he wanted Abel to study the characters better this way. That also makes no sense since Caine could have just given him all this information at creation. In that case, only one correct option remains. All this time, the characters were being watched by a real human, and as we found out today, it was Scratch. In favor of the idea that this mannequin is a real character and not an NPC is also the fact that he was only noticed within the digital circus itself, although almost all major events happened during adventures. And if Caine wanted to kinda train him this way, then he could have sent him on adventures. So at this point we have several facts. Abel was originally Scratch. The plan with the bee drawn on it was also originally real, however it later ended up in Caine's hands. As for the plan, I have one more piece of evidence. Everything here is written way too well thought out and truthful, and considering what Abel told us, it's very unlikely that Caine would have access to this kind of information. Sure, he could have made it up, but agree that everything here looks extremely believable and kinda human. Having all of this, we can move to the final part of the video, where I will explain why this escape plan is real and at what moment something went wrong. Scratch actually developed the plan, and at first there was a real human inside Abel's body. Everything went off plan exactly at the moment when Scratch was telling Jax about his plan. I'm sure the show creators hinted this way, that this was the exact moment when Caine heard what was coming and started acting fast. Before we continue, let's remember something about Caine. In episode 6, we were shown this strange room for the first time, which apparently is one of the C&A offices in the real world. In episode 7, the show creators once again put emphasis on this, considering that recently Caine clearly realized that his adventures are not liked by the residents of the digital circus, thereby convincing himself that he is failing at his main task. I can totally imagine that after Caine exposed the others, he did not interfere right away, wanting to watch where all of this would lead. So let's get back to the theory. After Caine found out about the planned escape plan, at first, like I already said, he didn't interfere with what was going on, and just watched from the sidelines and played along with the characters. It's hard for me to say at what exact moment Scratch was replaced with an NPC. Most likely it happened after Pomni went to Caine's office. I also noticed that a lot of people paid attention to this line from the mannequin.
But I trust all of you to make the right choice.
When we all get out, I'll buy you a beer.
Make the right choice.
For some reason, everyone interprets it as a reference to the idea that this whole plan is a lie, and that Abel is supposedly hinting that they should choose the red button. I'm genuinely interested in why nobody thinks that this was actually him hinting that the characters shouldn't be afraid to make the right choice and press the blue button to escape. Getting back to the main line of the video, we understand that before a real escape, the characters had only one action left. Caine understood this too, and that's exactly why when the administrator realized that the blue button was about to be pressed, he kinda connected to Jax's consciousness, and by playing on his fear of returning to the real world, literally forced him to make a choice that fully satisfies Caine. This way, he once again creates the illusion for himself that everyone is happy. Agree that this theory is insane and logical at the same time. If all of this is true, then I can't even imagine what will happen to the digital circus when all the characters realize that they were never actually being lied to, and that their own actions are what led to them staying in this digital prison. It seems to me that all of this was true, and what I've said in the video is already enough to prove it, and I didn't even take into account the fact that if this was a lie, then why put on this whole show with the keys? Because if this really was just an adventure, then Abel would perfectly understand the fact that they could just open the door. In episode 8, we learned that the digital circus appeared in 1996 from the moment Caine showed up inside the system he was placed into by C&A employees. However, the first characters only appeared in 1999, and the very first one was Scratch. We know that Scratch basically led the development of Caine, and even though it was never directly stated, Kinger's words about Scratch's genius and outstanding abilities very clearly hint at that. Kinger said that Scratch was terminally ill. He was diagnosed with a brain tumor. All of this could suggest that Scratch might have been the one who came up with the idea of transferring consciousness into the system where Caine created the digital circus, since he understood that he didn't have much time left in the real world, while in the digital world he could become immortal. However, unfortunately, or fortunately, that's not the case, because if we go back to the very first scene of episode 8 and look at the German subtitles, we realize that's not what happened at all. Is there any way we can get out of here? What exactly is this place? At this point, it becomes obvious that Scratch basically became a victim of his own creation. However, besides him, the original Digital Circus cast had 6 more characters: Queenie, Spike, Wormo, Ratty, Bizco, and Kinger. I'm more than sure that all of them ended up in the Digital Circus at the same time, in 1999. After Scratch, Queenie entered the Digital Circus, then Wormo, Spike, Bizco, and Ratty. Considering what I said about Scratch, we understand that not much time passed between his appearance in the Digital Circus and Kinger's appearance, which means Kinger also showed up in 1999. This is the original Digital Circus cast, and no one new showed up until 2008 when Ragatha entered the Digital Circus, but we'll get to that later. Considering that in episode 7 it was revealed that Scratch was the first to become abstracted, we can understand that sometime around 2000 he left the Digital Circus. In 2001, Wormo became abstracted, and I'm 100% sure about that. Pay attention to how the entire Digital Circus cast looks. They somewhat resemble the characters we're used to. However, Wormo really stands out from the rest. He's the only character who had no limbs at all. It's obvious that this kind of condition made his life much harder, and since the main thing to do in this digital prison is trying to find fun in Caine's weird adventures, and without arms and legs, that's even harder to do, that kind of existence clearly brought him no joy, and slowly drove him insane. Also, in episode 6, we could spot Wormo in the list of former C&A employees. Maybe just like Scratch, he was trying to figure out how everything works inside the Digital Circus and where the way out is hidden. However, constant, failed attempts combined with the form the system gave him led to his abstraction. In 2002, Spike became abstracted, and even though he looks like a pretty cheerful character, looking at him in the episode 8 scene and in the concept art, we can clearly see that he was extremely depressed. From the very beginning, he accepted that the Digital Circus wasn't a place for him, which combined with his growing depression led to his abstraction. 2003 took another character from the Digital Circus, and that was Ratty. If you look at her concept art, you can notice some similarities to Ragatha's classic behavior. Ratty was among the first to enter the Digital Circus, which means she had no one around who could help her understand how to deal with everything that was happening. Trying to act like an always positive character eventually led to her completely distancing herself from others and becoming disappointed in the Digital Circus. Bizco managed to last until 2005, and that's only because he was a pretty positive character. It seems to me that Bizco is an earlier version of Kaufmo. The difference is that Bizco isn't on the list of C&A employees, unlike Kaufmo. It's unlikely that he was trying to escape the Digital Circus. The reason for his abstraction is that he just couldn't handle living through the same thing every single day while slowly watching his friends turn into abstracted monsters. For several years, Kinger and Queenie remained in the Digital Circus alone, and in 2007, this happened. Queenie became abstracted, and from the original Digital Circus cast, only Kinger was left, who for about a year was the only resident of the Digital Circus. In 2008, Ragatha appeared. From the very beginning, Ragatha was, to put it mildly, surprised by her new place of living. However, the fact that Kinger was there, who had already been inside the Digital Circus for a long time, including being there alone, is what saved Ragatha. Kinger spent a lot of time with her, explained everything, and when it was needed, calmed her down. That's exactly why Ragatha speaks so warmly about Kinger now. For about a year, they were in the Digital Circus together, and in 2009, Cyclop and Clowny appeared. In 2010, Ribbit entered the Digital Circus, and within that same year, Clowny became abstracted. If you look at his design, you can immediately tell that just like some other characters, he was extremely depressed from the very beginning. It's very likely that the Digital Circus cast at that time couldn't support him the way he needed. In 2011, Bo appeared, and then Cyclop became abstracted, who was replaced by Oyster in 2012. In 2013, the well-known Kaufmo showed up, and this is where things get more interesting. We remember that Kaufmo was on the list of former C&A employees, and I have a theory that he entered the Digital Circus on purpose. Remember what Ragatha said about him.
Kaufmo, listen! I know we didn't always get along, like when you called me out for fake laughing at your jokes.
Maybe Kaufmo decided to enter the digital circus to free all the characters trapped there. It's very likely that at that time, C&A was in the final stage of its existence, and Kaufmo chose the perfect moment to save everyone, while the management and the other scientists were no longer monitoring what was happening inside the digital circus. That's probably why Kaufmo was so obsessed with finding an exit, and that's exactly what drove him insane. After Kaufmo appeared, Bo was sent to the cellar, and then in 2014, Oyster shared her fate and was replaced by Jax. In 2015, Gangle first saw the amazing digital circus, and exactly 1 year later, Ribbit became abstracted. We still don't know what exactly happened to her, however the most likely version is a conflict with Jax and everything that followed from that situation. In 2016, Zubil basically replaced Ribbit, and then the events happened that we all saw. Gooseworx said multiple times that the events in the digital circus take place in 2017, and it was in that year that Kaufmo became abstracted, and we saw Pomni, who became the last member of the current digital circus cast. Recently, Goose dropped a track with an interesting title, Your New Home, and if you've already listened to it, you know it's a direct reference to the digital circus. So Goose is basically hinting that there is no way out of the digital circus, and the characters are stuck there forever. Let's quickly think about what the future of the digital circus might look like. In 2017, Caine disappeared, and gradually the other characters will also start becoming abstracted. Considering that Jax is the most mentally fragile, it's very likely that in 2018 he'll be the first from the current cast to turn into an abstracted monster. Not being able to handle everything that's happening, Gangle will become abstracted right after him. They'll manage to hold on as a group of 4 for about a year, and in 2019, Zubil will become abstracted. No matter how strong Pomni may seem, the maximum she'll last in that state is about a year, and in 2020 she'll meet the same fate as the others. I think Kinger and Ragatha will hold on for a few more years, and then in 2022, Ragatha will become abstracted, leaving Kinger alone forever. I'm sure that Kinger will never become abstracted and will just wander through the ruins of the circus. The abstracted characters will be divided into main and secondary ones, so to speak, and we also have 4 abstracted characters we know nothing about, and everything said about them will just be my theory. And with that said, let's begin. The show creators announced this character even before the pilot episode dropped. However, his absence in Meet the Gang gave fans a weird feeling up until the pilot release, where we found out that Kaufmo had turned into an abstracted monster. Kaufmo is a clown, which is basically one of the default skins in the digital circus, and it's pretty symbolic that he was replaced by a character from the same category, Pomni. So far, there's no exact info on when he appeared in the digital circus, however the most believable version is 2013. In episode 7, during the showcase of the escape plan that Abel came up with, you could notice a small fragment with the names of characters who used to work at C&A, and Kaufmo is there too. This is actually a really important detail that will help us figure out the reason behind his abstraction, but let's go step by step. In the pilot episode, we only saw his cardboard cutout, while for the rest of the time he was already in the terminal stage of abstraction. His room will also be important a bit later, but for now, let's listen to what the circus residents were saying about Kaufmo.
I think Kaufmo's gone insane. Last time I spoke with him, he was rambling endlessly about some exit.
How is Kaufmo doing? I hope he's not still mad at me for not laughing at his jokes.
Already at this point, we understand that Kaufmo was a pretty cheerful guy who was always trying to somehow cheer others up, make them laugh, or support the other characters. However, not many people truly appreciated that support. Also in episode 2, we were shown the funeral scene, and you can notice that even though not many people laughed at Kaufmo's jokes, he was still an important part of the group, and his abstraction caused genuine sadness and grief among the others. We see that when Kaufmo was around the others, he was always smiling and having fun. However, here lies the classic clown problem. Behind the mask of constant joy and fun, there's often a very depressed person. I'm sure the same thing was happening with Kaufmo, and all of this was made worse by several factors. Working at C&A, the so to speak fakeness of the others, Ribbit's abstraction, and the constant attempt to find a way to leave the digital circus. As a former C&A employee, Kaufmo most likely understood what kind of technology the company was developing, and considering that he ended up in the digital circus as one of the later employees, I have a theory that he started asking questions about them and their disappearance, and in response, the heads of C&A decided to show him firsthand what this company actually hides. If my theory about 2013 is correct, and we know for sure that the current events take place in 2017, that means Kaufmo managed to last in the digital circus for about 4 years, and all that time he was trying to solve the mystery of how to get out of the digital circus. Remembering what Kinger said, we understand that Kaufmo had recently started distancing himself from the others, and all of this is connected to that same exit, which we see a lot of references to in his room. Kaufmo was literally obsessed with finding a way out of the circus, and on one hand, all his drawings suggest that he couldn't find a solution. However, pay attention to this image, which looks suspiciously similar to the events of episode 8. What if Kaufmo actually figured out how to get out of the digital circus and was ready to tell everyone, but Caine found out about it and using his ability to manipulate the characters' minds, slowly started pushing Kaufmo to the edge. Kaufmo was already pretty depressed, unable to find real friends, because even in their trio, he kind of felt like the odd one out. The loss of Ribbit and many other characters, all of this was the perfect starting point to break the mind of an already mentally unstable character who spent years searching for a way out. Considering that the main event started with the situation around Kaufmo, it would be insanely symbolic to see him as part of someone's memory in the final episode, and I'm sure that's exactly what's going to happen. That ended up being a lot about Kaufmo, but it was important to go over, and besides, a lot of people have already forgotten about this character. The others will be shorter, I promise. Queenie was one of the first to end up in the digital circus. Her first appearance, just like the rest of the original cast, was in 1999. Queenie is Kinger's wife, and he only has the warmest memories of her. On top of that, in episode 8, we were also shown Kinger and Queenie's first meeting in the digital circus.
I wish I could remember your name.
Same.
I'm so sorry I roped you into this with me.
It's quite strange, isn't it?
By now, we already have enough information to understand who Queenie was. She was kind and cheerful, loved insects, but most importantly, she was an amazing wife who was ready to support her husband in any situation while also being pretty rational. I already said that Queenie ended up in the digital circus in 1999, however, I'm interested in the reason behind that. We don't see her on the list of former employees, and Kinger directly stated that it was his fault. I have a theory that originally C&A weren't planning to use their employees as test subjects, however those who knew too much, or at least wanted to know, they were basically punished in this way. Maybe Kinger brought Queenie to C&A to test the new technology they had developed, however the problem is that Kinger had no idea what the real goal of the heads of C&A was. This eventually led to Queenie's consciousness being transferred into a digital reality called the Amazing Digital Circus. We know that Kinger and Queenie were the only residents of the digital circus for a long time. I have a theory that this lasted 3 years and Queenie's abstraction happened in 2007. Taking this into account, we can once again appreciate Queenie as a truly wise and strong woman who held on for as long as she could. Most likely it was insanely hard for her to stay in the digital circus for so many years, however her deep love for her husband kept delaying this process. After spending 3 years, just the two of them, constantly taking part in Caine's endless, fun adventures, Queenie simply couldn't stay inside this chaos anymore. Her mental state kept getting worse month by month, and even Kinger couldn't do anything about it anymore. Just like with Kaufmo, I'm sure memories of her will appear in episode 9. Recently, I made a full video about this character where I broke down absolutely every detail, so today let's briefly go over the key events. Ribbit appears on the list of former C&A employees, so I have a theory that she knew what the company was working on. Remember what she said in the trailer for episode 9.
Have you ever done something that you regret?
What if with those words, Ribbit is trying to hint to Jax and to us that she fully understood what C&A was actually doing, and now she regrets it? It's very possible that she wanted to tell everything to the police or the media, and because of that, the company's management decided to send her to the digital circus forever. Ribbit ended up in the digital circus in 2010 and managed to last for about 6 years. I can describe Ribbit as an insanely positive character we still have a lot to learn about. She was cheerful, kind, understanding. Notice that only with Ribbit, Jax can show his true self, and that already says a lot. Considering that Ribbit held on for a long time, I'm sure that if not for that conflict with Jax during the snow adventure, we would still see Ribbit in the current cast of the digital circus. Jax has a pretty messed up worldview that doesn't lead him anywhere good, and I'm sure he tried to push that onto Ribbit. For some time, she followed that advice. However, as soon as her real personality started coming through, Jax would immediately get aggressive, which eventually kept breaking Ribbit's mental state. I think in episode 9, besides the good memories with Ribbit, we'll also get the truth about what happened during the snow adventure, after which Ribbit turned into an abstracted monster. The last of the main abstracted characters is, of course, Scratch. I'm sure his story will be explored even more in episode 9, and we'll definitely see memories with him involved, but let's go step by step. The show creators immediately put emphasis on the Scratch we all know who is trying to say something to Caine. We don't hear what exactly he's saying, and if you look at the subtitles, there's no transcript either. However, in the German version, they left us a hint, and Scratch is actually saying, "Is there any way we can get out of here? What exactly is this place?" At this point, we understand that Scratch has no idea what's going on, despite the fact that he was one of the main developers at CNA, which is something Kinger himself told us. Scratch was a genius among programmers. He stood out from the others because of his vision and his ideas. We also found out that Scratch was seriously ill. He was diagnosed with a tumor in the head. We weren't told whether it was benign or malignant. However, judging by Kinger's reaction to this memory, we can understand that Scratch was most likely terminally ill, but we'll need that a bit later. We've got Scratch. He was inspired by Rover, the animated Lil Doggy on Windows computers. The image hanging on the door of his room has been familiar to us for a long time already. However, in this concept, we can point out a few interesting details. It's very likely that originally it was planned for Scratch to be a classic dog walking on 4 legs, and I'm more than sure that this was the very first concept of Scratch, and you'll understand why a bit later. In episode 8, we were shown Scratch's outfit, and basically he only has a red t-shirt, while in the concepts his look kept changing. Here he's only in pants, here in pants and a vest, and in this concept, Scratch looks like a typical early 2000s teenager. In episode 7, we were told that Scratch was the very first one to get abstracted. This raises some questions because, as a programming genius, Scratch was obviously trying to find a way out, maybe because of his unconventional thinking and overall view of life. He simply couldn't handle himself. I'm sure that in the real world, everything he touched worked out, while endless but at the same time useless attempts to hack a system that he himself built led him to giving up faster than anyone else. However, we remember that Kinger mentioned Scratch's illness. We know that physically it's impossible to die in the digital circus, but what if serious real-life illnesses somehow carry over into the digital circus in a distorted form? We can see clear examples of this in the behavior of Gangle and Zubil, and it clearly prevents them from living normally in the digital circus. What if the tumor in the head was the main reason for the rapid progression of all the stages of abstraction? What do you think about that? Bizco is actually a really interesting character. At first glance, you might think he's a super depressed character. However, if you look at his concept art, you can tell he's kind of a mix of Kinger and Pomni. He has separate hands like Kinger, and his face, expressions, and hat are like Pomni. Also in one of the concepts, you can notice a clock face, but apparently they decided to remove it in the final version. It seems to me that Bizco was a cheerful guy who always tried to support and help others, and by coincidence ended up in the digital circus, where literally everyone is at risk of going insane, and as a result getting abstracted, which is exactly what ended up happening to him. A purple toy dinosaur who, judging by the concept, is a bit weird, but at the same time an extremely depressed character. You could see that in the episode itself. Spike is a unique character because he's basically a single complete toy, and I couldn't find anyone in the current cast who could be considered his so to speak second version. I think the reason for his abstraction is obvious to everyone. He was extremely depressed about everything happening in the digital circus from the very beginning, and considering that even over time he couldn't change like Pomni did, the sadness that kept growing week after week because of everything going on just left him with no other choice. Another member of the original cast was Warmo, and it's honestly really cool for me to realize that I predicted his name even before the official reveal. Based on the concept, we understand that his original design was something similar to Zubil. It's very likely that he also suffers from body dysmorphia, and I'll explain why. Despite the fact that one of his design options looked something like Scratch or Jax, the final version turned out to be the worst of all. Not only does he sleep in a way where both of his eyes are open, he's also the only character who had no arms or legs, which clearly made his life harder. Body dysmorphia basically shows itself through the inability to accept yourself and your body. And if in Zubil's case we see a lot of different parts that she constantly swaps trying to find the perfect version, in Warmo's case everything is way worse. Most likely he couldn't accept himself to such an extent that the system decided to remove absolutely all the necessary body parts, supposedly solving his problem. Ratty was the smallest character in the entire history of the digital circus, and it's obvious that she is basically Ragatha before the actual Ragatha appeared in the digital circus tent. They're both plush toys who always want to look as cheerful as possible. I also noticed that Ratty has some kind of issue with her right eye. Ragatha has the same thing. Based on this, we can understand that Ratty had the exact same personality as Ragatha. However, the circumstances that led to it most likely were different. Besides the abstracted characters we've already seen and know about, there are 4 more that we only know were once in the circus. I don't want to drag the video out, so let's go over all of them at once and briefly. First of all, it's important to note that all of them were regular people who ended up in the digital circus basically by accident. We don't know their names, so I called them this: Bo, Cyclops, Oyster, and Clowny. Cyclops ended up in the digital circus in 2009 and abstracted in 2011. Clowny was in the circus from 2009 to 2010, Bo from 2011 to 2013, and Oyster from 2012 to 2014. All of them simply couldn't handle the reality they found themselves in, and the realization that they would have to stay in the circus for the rest of their lives slowly drove them insane, which led to the only final outcome in the digital circus. I'm sure that in the final episode we'll definitely get way more about the main abstracted characters, while the others might also show up from time to time in someone's memories, but they'll just be background characters. First off, it's important to understand that right now we have a full picture of how only 3 rooms look. Zubil's room,
So it won't break as easily. Try it on.
Jax's room, Pomni's room. It's also important to understand that technically we did see Kinger's room, and of course I'm talking about his pillow fort.
Hi, Gangle. Hi, Zubil. You startled me.
We're currently preparing everything, but we need to keep it quiet so Caine doesn't stop us.
However, we all understand perfectly well that this is just a homemade, so to speak, structure that Kinger built himself with a single purpose, which we'll talk about a bit later. Despite the fact that the pillow fort is Kinger's room, and in most fans' view, he doesn't have any other room, if you watched episode 3 closely, then during the scene with Kinger's memories of the moment his wife got abstracted, we could notice some outlines of his room. To understand why Kinger chose to live in the pillow fort, and trust me, the dark space that lets Kinger stay sane isn't the only reason. First, we need to talk about the rooms we already know well. Pomni's room was shown to us way back in episode 2, and we can pretty much immediately notice a few weird details. Pomni's bed looks way too huge for her. Same goes for this, so to speak, nightstand, the chair, or the table. The mirror in Pomni's room also looks way too big, and the funniest part is that it's meant so Pomni could look at herself full height. But if you just compare Pomni's size and the size of that mirror, it's pretty obvious that would be kinda difficult. Even the toys in Pomni's room look way too big for her size. You could say the same thing about the blocks, but if you look at their size in the other rooms, you'll realize that's just the standard size for those items. Considering that Pomni herself is the smallest character in the digital circus, while her room clearly isn't designed for that at all, we can understand that this way Pomni's room acts as a reflection of the oppression coming from the digital circus. This is just the beginning, and things are going to get way more complicated and interesting from here. But for now, let's take a look at the rooms of the other characters. We all know Zubil's main problem that she talked about back in episode 3. Not accepting your own body is a pretty common problem that the show creators conveyed through Zubil's character. Now take a closer look at her room. Insanely weird wallpaper and carpet, Zubil's box where she keeps all her parts, a huge amount of mirrors, a marble statue of a woman from the Renaissance era. All these details literally traumatize Zubil every single day, reminding her of the internal problems she lives with. The mirrors force her to look at herself every day. The box with parts won't let her calm down and settle on one thing, and the marble statue reflects how Zubil would want to look. At this point, after breaking down Zubil's and Pomni's rooms, we already understand perfectly well that each character's room is deliberately designed to constantly remind them of their main issues. We're not talking about some global problems related to health or, for example, their life as a whole, but about certain internal complexes and the things that bother these characters every single day. It's very possible that in the real world Pomni was short, and that this was actually a problem for her. Her room basically reflects that. In this context, it's insanely interesting to talk about Jax's room, and since in episode 7 we were shown a very dark scene where it's pretty hard to make anything out, we're gonna look at the colored version of his room. From the very first seconds, you can tell this is a room meant for a girl. Everything is pink, rainbows, some kind of kid's table and chairs, a pink diary on an equally pink table. We know Jax is a young 22-year-old guy, but the question is, why does his room look like it belongs to a 5-year-old girl? This is where things get more interesting, because earlier I said that a room reflects the real inner struggles of the characters. So then why does Jax's room look like this? There's a theory that because of Jax, a car crash happened, and the image of the person Jax hurt got burned into his memory so deeply that it literally started haunting him. That event likely became the biggest trauma in Jax's life, and that's exactly why his room looks the way it does. However, like I already said, this is just a theory, and to me, the reason behind this interior feels completely different. In our previous videos, we already talked about the fact that deep down Jax is actually a very sensitive and sentimental character. This is just an attempt to hide behind a tough guy mask that has nothing to do with reality. Most likely after losing his close friends, Jax decided to act in a way that would make sure no one would ever want to talk to him again, stripping himself of even the smallest chance of going through the same thing Jax went through after the abstraction of Kaufmo and Ribbit. So this way we understand that Jax's room reflects his weakness, because inside the body of a 22-year-old man, there's a little girl hiding who's scared of absolutely everything. Wrapping up this midpoint, we can see that the character rooms were created by the digital circus itself, based on the fears, complexes, and inner struggles of the characters. They were deliberately designed this way to traumatize the circus residents even more, not letting them live peacefully in this digital prison. On top of that, the show creators made the rooms in a way that lets us immediately understand what exact problem is bothering each character, reflecting a lot of what happens in the real world. How many people hide their true self behind some kind of mask? How many can't find themselves or struggle because of their parameters? Even if we look at Ragatha's room, we see a piano. Everyone remembers Ragatha's relationship with her mom. Maybe the piano is a reflection of failed attempts to build a connection with parents who are never satisfied with their child. Or take Gangle, whose room is probably the most stylish, but at the same time, the darkest, and so to speak, the scariest. Her room reflects the struggles of people with mental instability, since constant mood swings without a reason often don't let a person calm down, pushing them deeper and deeper into darkness. At least that's how I see it, and of course, if you've got your own thoughts on this, I'll be glad to see them in the comments. However, let's still return from the real world back to the digital circus and talk a bit about Kinger, who, as we know, lives in his pillow fort instead of the room assigned to him. To me, the reason for this is pretty obvious, since Kinger is one of the very first characters who ended up in the digital circus, and over time he realized what the real purpose of the rooms is. After Queenie got abstracted, Kinger finally decided to move into the pillow fort for good so that no mention of his inner problems would bother him ever again. However, I was insanely interested in the question of why the rooms of characters who turned into abstracted monsters look the way they do, and why Caine doesn't delete them from the digital circus. The answer is actually pretty simple. Caine doesn't have access to a character's closed room, since this place is defined by the system as a private zone of the character that the AI can't enter. That's exactly why Caine was able to get into Zubil's room only at the moment when the door was opened. Even after abstraction, the system keeps each room assigned to a specific character, slightly modifying it. I'm sure Kaufmo couldn't have drawn all of that while being on the edge of abstraction. Most likely, after Kaufmo turned into that creepy creature, the system remembered his last thoughts and inner struggles and projected all of that onto Kaufmo's room. Is there any TADC episode that's going to be slightly, or even significantly, shorter than the average 23 to 25 minutes? There's one that ended up being really long, but I'm not going to say which one it is. Which episode are you most excited for? I dread the day each new episode is released. I think I know what you're planning. You'd be surprised at how many people think they know that. What is the worst part of working on TADC? Trying to make the show live up to the hype. It never will. Random line from episode 7, please.
You're only making the joke take longer.
Is there any chance at a Digital Circus Season 2, or is it a limited series? I don't really think there could be a Season 2. Is there going to be comedy in episode 3? There's comedy in every episode. If someone had the chance to just straight up punch Caine in the face, who would it be? Pomni or Zubil? When will Jax take his clothes off? He's tried many a time. Did you feel like any jokes didn't land or weren't satisfying to you so far in TADC? I hate all the jokes by the time the episode comes out. How would Pomni react to the simps? I think she'd find Homer funny, but Lenny would probably be her favorite. How did you come up with the idea for Gangle's design? Max and Ribno or Mask and Ribbon? What do you plan on doing once TADC is finished? What's the worst thing Jax has done? You'll get to see that with your very eyes. I have a question. Is Caine capable of going out into the real world and transforming others into stuffed animals? He's just code, so no. Are you afraid of how big TADC has gotten in popularity? Oh yeah. What happens if you ingest the stupid sauce instead of pouring it into your eyes? You get like 32% less stupid than if you put it in your eye. Does Jax like grapes? Bunch of little balls gathered tight together? There's something wrong with you. What Jax likes that no one knows about? He won't let me tell you. Why is Jax like that? A big cocktail of internal issues. What does Pomni think of Jax? You'll have to wait and see. What does 57 mean, and why is it in like every episode? Funny 57 make me go lol. If you were to change one thing from the pilot, what would it be? The dialogue. Would you ever work at Spudsy's? Bro, I worked there for 5 years. If I hug my Caine plushie enough times, will he feel loved? Definitely not. Which would you say is your favorite episode of TADC at the moment? Could be the finished ones or one of the upcoming ones we haven't seen yet. Probably like 8 or 4. Do people still get period cramps in the circus? Probably not, unless Caine for some reason willed it to be. Which episode will Jax suffer the most in? Haha. Oh. Will we ever see into Jax's room? Yeah. Which character from TADC do you relate to the most? This is gonna sound bad, but Jax. Who abstracted right before Kufmo? Ribbit. Why is the sun so toxic? Plasma. So, did Gangle actually try to commit, or was it just a genuine accident she tripped off that curb and into that truck and got ran over, or it's up to your interpretation? What's the most dangerous duo in Digital Circus? You'll have to wait and see. How do you feel about Zubil and Gangle being a ship? Is that problematic, or is it okay for me to ship them? I don't want to be disrespectful. You guys can ship whatever you want. I personally think they'd be good for each other, but you didn't hear that from me. The last couple episodes, we've seen circus members mention details from their life before the circus. Have they been able to remember things in their own with time and focus? Or did it require Caine? They all remember their previous lives. Is there anything awful that Jax wouldn't do? Yeah, there are a few lines he won't cross. Did Caine give Kinger his own solo adventure during episode 4, and will we ever see that? I think the joke works better if we don't ever see it. One question and one question only. Is Jax a loser? A pathetic loser. Will we get to learn a little more about C and A in the later episodes? You'll have to wait and see. What's a message you want people to take away from TADC? That there's meaning to be found in a stagnant life. Has Caine called the circus characters, as in the entire main cast, any incredibly stupid nicknames? Oh, you have no idea. Will people still love Jax after the episodes are released? That really depends on their personal taste in men. Can you tell me the names of the 2 crocodiles Gummy Goo has with him? Max and Chad. Why doesn't Zubil like to go on adventures? Have you seen these adventures? I really like your character writing so far. I find it very interesting. Was there a certain inspiration behind the writings for the characters of TADC? Breaking Bad. We all know that Jax is your favorite to draw, but who is your least favorite to draw? Ragatha. She's really hard to draw for me, and I don't know why. Who's your favorite NPC? Gummy Goo? It's not even close. Which character, aside from Jax, do you consider the most puntable? Caine. Can you please say a random phrase of Pomni from episode 9? No episode 9 quotes allowed. Will there be more singing moments in future episodes? Definitely not. Do you have a favorite joke bit from TADC of the ones we've seen so far? Probably Baron Mildenhall saying,
Okay, I won't.
That one still tickles me a little bit. What is your favorite part of Jax's character design? His weird eyes. Was TADC always going to be 3D animated, or were there any plans to make it a 2D show? It was conceptualized with 3D in mind. What's your favorite scene in episode 2? The Pomni and Gummy Goo heart-to-heart conversation. Which of the circus cast could Little Runmo beat in a fight? Absolutely none. When are we getting the soundtracks for episodes 5 and 6? I need the music so bad. Sorry, I'm tired. What's everyone's favorite animal? Does Jax like bunnies? Jax likes a lot of things he would never admit. More Kinger lore, perhaps? I love him with all my soul. Thank you for bringing him into the world. Patience. We will get there eventually. What's your opinion on the Funny Bunny ship? I genuinely don't know whether the people who ship it are going to love or hate the direction the story goes. Did you have the whole general plot planned out before you started writing the first episode, or did you come up with some of it as you went? I plan everything out before I begin, so I can properly set things up that will be relevant later. Will you be taking a short, decently sized break after TADC ends? I can imagine dealing with everything that came with it can be exhausting as f***. Oh yeah. Since we're almost at the end of the amazing Digital Circus, how do you feel about the amazing Digital Circus ending? Oh, thank God. How woke is Jax? That's a really complicated and nuanced question. How do you feel about people leaking frames or parts of episodes of TADC? Nobody's ever leaked anything real except for me, so I don't care. Looking back on the show, what are you most proud of? Every time I've hurt people. Now that we're near the end of the show's run, are there any TADC designs you would want to go back and change? I'd make Gummy Goo a little hotter. What's your favorite outfit you've ever put the TADC characters in? I like putting Jax in dresses because I'm a bad person. Goose, what's your message to the fandom before episode 9 hits? This one's a bit heavy, so be ready for that. Any interesting TADC concepts or ideas that ended up being cut? Ragatha was originally going to be subject to a lot more violence, and she was going to have plush organs. I'm just wondering if you wrote the commercials for the TADC merch. The last one I helped write was the Tropical Resort one. I didn't write any of the new ones. Can we get ages of abstracted characters? Nah, you're all on your own for that. Are the TADC ads canon to the show? No. Is Bubble still alive? He was deleted with Caine. What is Ragatha's horse's name? Chestnut, Butterscotch, and Alfredo. How long were you thinking about the amazing digital circus before you pitched it to somebody? Glitch approached me asking for an idea for a 3D pilot, and I came up with the idea within 2 weeks of that as a testing the waters idea to see if I could actually make a show. What do you personally think all the characters' names would be in the real world? All I've heard is Ragatha would be Agatha and Jax as Jack, but I think those are very basic. I've known their real names from the beginning. Some people have figured out Kinger's real name. I think I've only seen one person guess Pomni's name. I think I saw someone guess Zubil's name for the wrong character, and I've seen one person guess Ragatha's name, but that's all so far. How do you feel knowing you've made it halfway through Digital Circus? Accomplished? Tired. Would Ragatha make out with me? Or anyone? But me in particular, just curious. Ragatha would only make out with Sam Tries Her Best on Twitter. If you had to use 1 or 2 words to describe the plot of episode 7, what would it be? Except the beach part. Beach part. Do you know what you're planning? I do. What was your favorite song or background music to compose for TADC? I had a lot of fun with the therapy music. Is Kinger's fort bigger on the inside than it looks on the outside? No, it was only bigger in the past, because it needed space for 2 people. The fact that Caine says,
"A big puzzle that I need to solve,"
in front of a toy, which is literally just tracing predetermined pathways, reads to me as a clever representation of how limited Caine's thinking is in terms of problem solving. Anyone notice that the scene where Pomni starts insulting and ridiculing Caine to distract him from finding Kinger may have been a reference to her character as a jester and their job of criticizing and making fun of monarchs, royalty, and/or nobility, or people in general positions of power, authority. In a previous episode, while Caine was having a therapy session with Zubil, he drew a bee and showed it to Zubil. In episode 8 during Caine Meltdown, we can see that same bee drawing sitting on his desk. During the scene that she was looking in the mirror, on the pilot, she has her right hand raised. Her glove is colored blue, which on episode 7 was the option of wanting to leave the circus. Meanwhile, on episode 8, she accepted they could not leave, so she raised her left hand instead, colored red being the option of staying in the circus. Ragatha's mom definitely went crazy and blinded Ragatha in one eye. Ragatha's siblings and/or other family relatives being dummies with knives may simply mean that she views them as having been passive towards her mother's abuse. Children who grow up in abusive households often begin to hate their own siblings for what seems like, in their eyes, never doing enough to stop the abuse. I definitely noticed when they talked about the big plan they zoomed in on the muffin. That shot of Zubil standing on that pile of body parts reminds me a lot of a similar shot from Toy Story 2. If you read the code Kinger writes, you can see that it actually asks him which backup he wants to revert Caine to. He chooses C, in which it says, none selected, interpreted as delete, so that's where it went wrong. Right before Caine starts torturing everyone, he says,
"I am putting my mind."
But if you turn in subtitles, they say, I am putting my mind to it. I just realized nobody's keeping the abstracteds trapped in the cellar anymore.
The tumor in his head. He was trying to make something.
Scratch was definitely trying to avoid death by making this program. At the end of the episode, since Caine has been removed and those restrictions, like the ability to swear, are gone, it would mean that if Caine forced them to forget their names, they would now be able to remember them. Also, the fact that Kinger's password when entering Caine's code is Queenie is so sad and adorable. The fact Caine doesn't understand human emotions but understands the things that can get a reaction out of them during their torture is insane. Did anyone notice that Caine is absent from the end credits? Like he was genuinely deleted. I have absolutely no words. Scratch's abstraction must have been horrific, considering the fact that Kinger remembered it while in front of a bright light. It's a small thing, but in the subtitles, Abel is labeled as NPC. I just realized that as Gangle and Zubil mentions Kinger about Abel, Kinger has no idea who they're talking about, and he's still in his pillow fort. Massive foreshadow that it was all just an adventure Caine made up. The first Chinese character that came out of the door was Egg, and the second one was Pain. The fact that they left us on a cliffhanger is wild. Anyone else notice the eyes in the paintings on the wall when they first went and talked about the plan with Jax? And I automatically remembered way Caine said, I'm keeping all of my 100 eyes one you, or something like that in pilot episode. When we're shown all of Jax's room, you can see a diary on his desk. So Kinger mentions a scratch as the first abstraction. Scratch or Old Scratch is an old pseudonym for the devil in Western folklore. This goes along with the biblical references of Cain and Abel. Honestly, it's weirdly nice seeing Cain be under pressure, being called out and questioned, because the tables have been turned on him for once. So when Jax was floating through that weird, colorful room, we got to see what abstraction looks like. It looks so peaceful. The Chinese room isn't a nonsense, but an experiment to make sure AI can learn languages other than English. I love how the show made a reference about facts on AI history. It has an AI character, Caine himself. During the scene where Pomni, Ragatha, and Abel go to get the passes, you can see a reference to the PS2 startup screen. I love how the fish seem like old NPCs from an old adventure back when Caine wasn't as advanced. The way Abel paused after Pomni said she'd buy him a beer when they returned home. Both Abel and Caine knew they would never be able to leave. Jax got his tail back too. You can see Kaufmo's name behind some of the scribbles. Abel's face drawing reminded me of Dream. I love parallel of Jax and Gangle in this EP. It's like Jax makes it all about building character and making facade, hide yourself in character, giving up on your identity, and Gangle just expressing herself, not character, the human side, and not being chained to the mask. The Jax's face slowly turning back into his characters after showing actual human emotions really gives me chills about how tortured he must actually be inside. The fact that Zubil has stupid sauce in her eye implies that either that's simply the quickest way to get the sauce in your system, or that's how Zubil consumes food. I think the second option is funnier, so I'm going with that. I like how the butterfly thing Kinger can do kinda relates to Queenie and Ragatha. Queenie introduced insects to him since he loved her and symbolically was the light of his life in the darkness. Hence why the butterfly is golden, shines in the dark and gives life back. And he said that Ragatha gave him his life back. Jax mentions how we all just became archetypes, which makes me think back to the fast food episode where Jax told Gangle, "I like you better when you're sad," when she had her different mask. Makes me think Jax doesn't like when the others change, or differ from their script. This can also be seen in the President Pomni scene where everyone is given a script apart from Pomni. Because he wanted to see what you do, he's been trying to find her archetype. I like the hint of Jax saying people who are close to abstracting are unpleasant to be around. Meanwhile, Jax is falling apart and hiding it, and acting so unpleasant to be around. The scene where Jax was trying not to break down was so relatable. The leg bouncing, disassociating, and using the tap as white noise to drown out his thoughts was an amazing touch. The slight smile Jax gives Pomni when she hugs him before getting terrified because he knows he has to push everyone away to avoid the grief of eventually losing them. Gangle is so cute even when she say, "We need to find the Tommy gun!" The fact that Jax kept shooting Ragatha even when there were no more bullets just shows how angry he really is but masks it with playfulness. The detail of Jax having a tail in this episode instead of last episode is a really good detail. Caine's eye color at the end when he glitches due to getting no votes is suspiciously similar to the eye color depicted on the cover of I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. I like the detail when Jax is describing characters, saying Ragatha is the cheerful one, Gangle's the sad one, etc. And during the entire episode it appears vice versa. Gangle is still smiling even after her happy mask is broken. Nice symbolism that she is both happy internally and externally.
I'm right behind you, aren't I?
Followed by the rapid shooting had me in tears. Stop! Was probably the most realistic angry yell I've ever heard. Bubbles' miserable little help me Caine is so funny to me. Love how Zubil is portrayed speaking about how you have to learn to love yourself even if you hate it and it seems pointless, just like how they hate their own body. Then they later take full advantage of their body and extra limbs to get an advantage. Jax stares at his hand for quite some time after pushing Pomni away, as if wondering to himself why he was so quick to reject her display of affection. I love the detail at 2556 of Pomni sharpening her teeth when saying
chaotic evil together.
Showing them reflecting in the fish tank is such a good detail, showing how they are stuck in the circus, like fish stuck in a tank. Jax was really throwing himself into singing Daisy Bell. Also, Pomni and Jax just happened to know the lyrics to Daisy Bell perfectly in that moment. The stargazing scene was hinted at from the very beginning of the series, with the official art piece Made by Goose. I wonder if black is Kinger's favorite color because it brings back the memory of his wife and him in the fort before she abstracted. In a previous episode, he mentioned darkness made that memory come back. When Jax was talking to Pomni under the stars, it feels different because she's not overly insane, optimistic, annoyed, or scared. She's able to express her emotions and opinions, even asking Jax directly if he doesn't have friends before Ragatha pushed it down. Breaking Bad reference.
After my lung cancer diagnosis, me and my junkie associate from a chemistry class I used to teach
Yeah, I
started-
figured. How about you, Gangle?
Hey, I wasn't done.
The transition to Japanese style is so smooth, glitch artists are so talented. Judging by Ragatha's newly revealed lore, I'm assuming she's trying to be nice, because she doesn't want to be anything like her mom and doesn't want to see herself growing to be like her. Notice how Zubil's doesn't interrupt the intermission up until Jax is tormented with a reminder of his lost friend. When Gangle holds a vote to make Jax wear a maid outfit, Pomni actually votes no, showing her becoming more fond of Jax. That Caine could change Jax into a vegan is actually really scary, and Jax notices. And somehow, Zubil knows something about it, or they wouldn't act jaded about it. I personally think that the NPC got accidentally stuck there after an adventure they went on, and has been there ever since, and whilst there, they have learned about everything. August the Duck. Honestly, the way Jax talks about Ragatha at 8:52 makes me think he used to find comfort in Ragatha when he first got into the digital circus, but as time went on, that comfortable feeling he had with Ragatha disappeared. Like Gangle said, it's hard to tell when Ragatha is genuine. During the bar adventure, Jax made a failed attempt to vote for Zubil to be turned into a slug. Since it's one of the show's main inspirations, that had to be a reference to "I have no mouth and I must scream." The joke where Caine zips up Zubil's lack of a mouth, which doesn't silence them, might be a reference as well. I absolutely loved Jax's facial expressions when Ragatha was talking about his lost friend and how his eyes got all big when she apologized. Such an amazing detail that really expressed the gravity of that situation. I love Kinger and how he keeps getting put in positions of authority for no reason whatsoever. The glance Ragatha threw at evil Pomni when she saw actual Pomni laugh at Jax's antics was such a good detail. She was concerned she was going to turn into her evil alter ego. When a character places the corn cob by Jax in the softball adventure, it's a reference to the meme of cats being scared of cucumbers, as he moves the same reaction as cats do when they see the cucumber, and it was the only full ear of corn in the episode. When Caine was pitching some future adventure ideas, one of his future adventure ideas was going to have the cast tour his amazing magic chocolate factory and get killed off by one from OSHA violations. This is a reference to Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Judging by the logo and the fact that Glitch Productions is based in Australia, the Jax burger is probably called Hungry Jack's, a play on words with Jax and Hungry Jack's, the Australian equivalent of Burger King. Whenever Ragatha apologizes to Jax during the softball game, it almost looks like Ragatha glitches when she turns around. In the beginning, Caine says,
"Welcome back, my candy hearts and paper flowers!"
which is a direct reference to Raggedy Ann in Andy's musical adventure. Jax's line,
Did I pick a bad time?
with Kinger under the desk references the Clinton Lewinsky scandal. I think that the evil big tops are just opposite versions of the characters, but because Gangle already is both comedy and tragedy, it creates a kind of paradox, so instead, she's replaced entirely. The moment where Jax's mood and personality shifts quickly when he leaves the restaurant shows how much he doesn't want to show human emotion to anyone he knows, and it also shows how tired he actually was. I love how Kinger is the only one that has an A+, even though he wasn't even there. I just noticed that after Gangle realizes that the clock is broken, a new clock shows up. Watch the chapter again. I noted Gangle says to Jax she has a manic episode. That explains why she started dancing, moving erratically, and fell to the traffic, and how she looked so sad when she realized what she had done. I also relate. Mania isn't being too happy. It's more of a state where you're too agitated and excited, but not actually happy. Just makes you more impulsive, more irritable, more alert, more unstable. Gangle is a perfect representation of both depression and bipolar disorder. Also on Jax's license plate in the corner, there's the numbers 1138, which is a Pixar reference because they secretly put the sequence A113 in their movies, as a reference to where most Pixar animators got their start. 113 are there, but A is replaced with 8, probably cause they sound similar. As someone who used to work in fast food, the attention to detail here was S tier. Caine mentioning non-slip shoes, those weird rubber floor mats with the holes, the little drawers for the finished burger patties. Even Gangle's line,
You got time to lean, you got time to clean.
I've had people tell me that exact thing, word for word. I love how confused Pomni gets when Jax acts normal towards her, like he doesn't say anything mean, asks how she is, all because he's been now traumatized by the reality of working a dead-end job with no way up. Gangle mentioning one of her previous jobs and Ragatha saying that she misses her horses. In Zubil's room, you can see dice on the floor, and it has 5, then 6 on 1 equals 7, so it's another 57. I can see a book on Caine's shelf called MatPat Theory. The butcher adventure idea from Caine is a nod to the meat freezer running joke. Caine is weirdly obsessed with that. When Orbsman walks up to the counter, you can see he is still in his walk animation for a second. I also came up with a theory that Orbsman was one of the first NPCs because of his buggy movements. Gotta love the foreshadowing when Gangle talks about not having the time for creating manga, and then in the last scene you see her drawing it. She was projecting her frustrations. When Jax says Pomni won't be getting a unicorn horn from Zubil, it's a reference to when Gooseworx would joke about Pomni's iconic unicorn horn online. The scene where Gangle throws the mask and smiles made hit me hard. As someone with depression, it does feel like that sometimes. Like the thing that most makes you miserable is hiding those feelings, not the feelings themselves. And when you drop the act, it feels kinda relieving. Even the tragedy mask can smile. When Jax was getting brainwashed from the TV with Gangle's masks, it reminds me of the movie Halloween 3 season of the witch of the commercial mask. I noticed on Jax's name tag, it says, "I don't care," which is pretty fitting for him. Plus, I definitely noticed characters from previous episodes like Gummigoo, Max, and Chad, along with the Gloink Queen and her Gloinks making an appearance too, which is pretty cool. Also, I can't believe the Gloink Queen names her Gloinks, Uzi, V, and Sin, in another dub because they are the names of the characters from Murder Drones. In the scene when Caine opens a trapdoor under Zubil, it has a sound effect that's used for the trapdoor into the incinerator in the original Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. In Caine's office, he was doodling bees on the papers. In the Polish dub, the Gloink kids' names are Tituś, Romuś, and Atomuś, which is a reference to Titus, Romek I A Tomek, a well-known Polish comic series made by Henryk Jerzy Chmielewski. In the Dutch dub, the stupid burger is called the Brain Rot Burger. Gummigoo does come back over to Pomni and gives another goodbye. It feels more sincerer than the other greetings, making me believe Gummy does remember the gang and what happened, but to avoid being voided or hurt again, doesn't spill the beans. Jax 001 is probably alluding to him being the first one ever to enter the circus. Orbsman actually does ask for the 57. His speech is incredibly garbled, but if you listen hard enough, you can tell what he's saying. His first line is, "Hello, I'm ready to order," and his second line is, "That's right, it is me, Orbsman. Can I order the classic number 57 value meal?" The German translation also featured an additional 57 reference to make up for one missing in the previous episode. When Pomni goes to Gummigoo as he's leaving the restaurant, you can hear the Gloink Queen say to Ragatha that she stopped counting after her 57th child. Ragatha then asks her why there wasn't a 57 in the last adventure. When they're in the wine cellar playing the tape where Baron Mildenhall talks about going crazy and killing his wife, Pomni cringes and looks up at Kinger nervously. Then when Kinger says,
Looks like we've got 2 shots. Let's make them count.
She winces again. For a moment there, she assumed the crazy chess piece was dangerous.
7 years of computer science for this, huh?
If I remember correctly, Kinger has been in the circus the longest. I wonder if he was involved in making the circus, possibly coding and or playtesting it. In the Spanish version, instead of,
I'm sorry, could you speak up? I couldn't quite make that out.
Kinger says, I don't speak Lovecraftian. And in the German version, he says, I don't speak French. The effort put into every aspect of this show is incredible. Notice how responsible Kinger is. He calmed Pomni down, took charge of the situation. It made me shed a tear. It shows that out of everyone, he's the most reliable one, in the dark. I just love how irrelevant Jax is in this episode. He's constantly trying to bring attention back to himself so he can regain some control and power over the others. He's literally tied up with his mouth bound, just so the girls could enjoy an adventure their way. He even wanted Pomni to badmouth Kinger with him. He looks so upset that he isn't in control. In the Polish dub, Caine says, "So how you doing my skibbity sigmas?" I think Jax's reaction was way more justified here. I like how when Zubil says forget it, Caine literally forgets about it. An interesting detail is how Kinger blinks. Normally he blinks with one eye and then with the other, but when he was in the dark he started blinking occasionally in a faster and more coordinated way, as if he was gradually regaining clarity, until when they were in hell he stops blinking unevenly completely when he was completely lucid. The fact that Kinger's fort is dark is such a cool detail. He must go in there to remember things. What really wows me is how Caine really acts like an AI in this episode. Like when you talk to your AI character, they normally don't follow the role-playing plot or relationships that you have with that AI, and they tend to forget details you specifically told them that are important. And Caine is the exact same way, where you can tell him something important, but he immediately forgets because he is only an AI and can only really respond and not memorize. I liked how he called the creature
Honey?
because it reminded him of his wife when she was abstracted. All the eyes, glowing in a dark location. The best part about Kinger glowing when he holds his breath is in the scene where they hold their breath while walking through hell, is that Kinger looks and feels like an angel guiding Pomni because he glows. Bubble is speaking in reverse and says,
I can't wait for all the children in the audience to get horrible nightmares from the monster.
I love how Jax just casually stands on the top of the falling truck defying physics out of spite. The fact that Kinger remembers stuff just from having a metal bucket in his head shows how good the dark is for him. Love the detail of the teapots being there. For those who don't know, it's a joke where people usually use teapots to test lighting. I like how you can see Pomni's anxiety and fear of being seen as nothing melt away when she realizes how much the rest of them care about each other, including herself. The funeral proved her own nightmare wrong, and while she is stuck here, she doesn't have to be secluded and alone. Gummy Goo causally looking in binoculars even though his eyes are on the side of his head. Just how Gummy Goo's partner lay his head on his back, it's just adorbs. The fact that it's Kinger who says
Pomni always seems to miss the big loopy monsters.
makes the foreshadowing even better. You can see Jax bring sad for a few seconds, meaning he does care for the abstracted ones. The sad face in the entrance to the Candy Kingdom. Bubbles tries to quit smoking bubbles. Truly based. Their little dance on the background kills me. During the part where Bubble swears, if you set the audio track to Hindi, it actually won't censor the audio, and you can hear what Bubble was actually saying. I'd become a dentist and pull everyone's teeth out. Then the money's mine and the candy is also mine. I wonder if Kinger's keeping his eyes closed so that he can try to be as coherent and sane as he can be for the funeral. I just noticed this, but in the background, you can see an NPC shaking another NPC, causing them to lose their head, and the other NPC panics. Jax seems to play along more than anybody else. He mentioned that they'd need to work Pomni into the song. He suggested Caine do an adventure. He was glad to receive the reward. He seems to accept the way things are the most. I love all the small little details, like how Caine's emotions are expressed through his teeth, or how there's several other characters in the living quarters hallway who have been X'd out. My personal favorite is the little detail when Pomni vomits. None of the characters appear to be disgusted or ashamed of Pomni for it having happened. Ragatha feels bad for Pomni, Zubil is disappointed, and Jax. Well, Jax is Jax. I just like how when Pomni runs by the mirror and just takes a look at herself, since she hasn't actually seen herself since appearing. Just like when they walk by her room and stares at what is supposed to be her. It's little things, but I thought those were cool details and highlighting her processing this whole experience. I noticed how Pomni flinched, almost as if she expected to be hit. Feels like the kind of detail that has more meaning when you rewatch the show. I think the whole not being able to remember your name thing comes from how most children's computer games tell you not to use your real name when creating a username. Caine says that if Pomni ventures too far out into the void, she will get totally spoiled, implying that Caine does know what is out in the void. It's the place he keeps his adventures. If you're still watching this, just know your legends. Thank you so much, everyone, and I'll see you soon.